The dust swirled in angry clouds as Lucy Sinclair watched the last wagon disappear over the horizon, leaving her alone in the vast emptiness of the Wyoming Territory. Her throat tightened, but she refused to cry. The year was 1867, and the Oregon Trail had claimed another victim, not through death this time, but through cruel abandonment. The fever that had kept her bedridden for 5 days had broken only hours ago, but Jeremiah Foster, the wagon master, had refused to wait any longer. "The pass will snow over if we delay," he'd said, his eyes not quite meeting hers. "You understand." She understood nothing except that her family's wagon was gone, along with most of her possessions and her chance at a new life in Oregon. She stood beside the remnants of a hastily abandoned campsite, the ashes of last night's fire still warm, her small trunk of personal items and a canvas tent the only things they'd left behind. "You'll never make it alone." Lucy whirled around, startled by the deep voice. A tall man with shoulders broad as an oak beam stood several yards away. His leather vest was worn at the edges, his cotton shirt faded from too many washings. A dusty cowboy hat shadowed piercing blue eyes, and a day's worth of stubble darkened his jaw. She recognized him, Wade Wilson, one of the scouts who had been riding ahead of their wagon train since Fort Laramie. "Mr. Foster said someone would come back for me once they reached the pass," she said, hating how her voice trembled. Wade shook his head. "Foster's not sending anyone back. He told us you were dead." The words hit her like a physical blow. "Dead, but I only had a fever. He didn't want anyone questioning why the train was leaving you." Wade stepped closer, his spurs jingling softly. "I figured he was lying, so I doubled back. You came back for me." Lucy stared at him, confusion mingling with the first flicker of hope. Wade's eyes softened slightly. "I'm not in the business of leaving people to die in the wilderness, Miss Sinclair." He glanced at her meager belongings, then back at the endless prairie stretching around them. "The nearest settlement is Shafter, about 40 miles east. It's not much, but it's something." 40 miles. Lucy felt her legs weaken. She was still recovering, barely able to stand for more than a few minutes. "We'll go together," Wade said, the simple words carrying a weight of promise that made her breath catch. "I've got a horse. It'll be slow going, but we'll make it." Lucy studied him, this quiet man who had rarely spoken more than a few words during the journey west. "Why would you do this for me, Mr. Wilson? You barely know me." Something flickered across his face, perhaps compassion, perhaps something more. "Out here, Miss Sinclair, we look after our own." He extended his hand. "Now, shall we get moving before nightfall?" Lucy hesitated only a moment before placing her hand in his. "Lead the way, Mr. Wilson." Neither of them knew it then, but those 4 simple words, "we'll go together," would change both their lives forever. Wade's horse, a sturdy Palomino gelding named Chance, carried Lucy's trunk and the folded canvas tent. They walked eastward, Wade leading the horse and Lucy trudging beside him. The late afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, and despite her determination, Lucy's strength began to flag within the first hour. "We should rest," Wade said, noticing her faltering steps. "No," Lucy insisted. "I can keep going." Wade stopped and turned to face her. "Miss Sinclair, I admire your spirit, but you've been ill. There's no shame in needing rest." Lucy wanted to argue, but her legs were trembling and sweat beaded on her forehead despite the cool autumn air. "Perhaps just a short break," she conceded. Wade nodded and led her to a small outcropping of rocks that provided some shade. He helped her sit, then retrieved his canteen. "Drink," he said, handing it to her. "Small sips." The water was warm but refreshing. Lucy drank carefully, then handed the canteen back. "Thank you." Wade settled beside her, removing his hat to wipe his brow. Without the shadow of the brim, His features were more visible, strong cheekbones, a straight nose that had been broken at least once, and eyes the color of a summer sky. He was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps 28 or 30. "How did you come to be with our wagon train, Mr. Wilson?" Lucy asked, partly out of genuine curiosity and partly to distract herself from her exhaustion. "Call me Wade," he said. "And I've been guiding trains since '62, beats fighting in the war. You were a soldier, briefly. Union cavalry." His expression closed like a door shutting. "Saw enough to know I wanted no more part in it." Lucy nodded, understanding his reluctance to speak of it. The war between the states had ended only 2 years prior, but the wounds it had inflicted were still raw for many. "And you, Miss Sinclair, what takes you to Oregon?" Wade asked, clearly changing the subject. "Lucy, please," she said. "My father was a doctor in Pennsylvania. After he died last winter, my mother decided to join her brother in Oregon. He has a farm outside Portland." Her voice caught. "She and my younger brother were in the second wagon." Wade's expression softened with understanding. "The one Foster wouldn't let wait for you." Lucy nodded, fighting back tears. Mother protested, but Mr. Foster was insistent, said one life couldn't be placed above the entire train. She looked down at her hands. "I suppose he's right in a cold sort of way." "Foster's a businessman first," Wade said, a hard edge to his voice. "He gets paid when people reach Oregon, not when they do the right thing." They sat in silence for a moment, the vast prairie stretching around them in all directions. A hawk circled lazily overhead, its cry the only sound besides the occasional snort from Chance. "We should move on," Wade finally said, rising and offering his hand. "We'll want to make at least 10 miles before dark." Lucy took his hand, surprised by how warm and calloused it felt against her own. She had been raised a proper lady in Philadelphia, taught that physical contact with men outside family was inappropriate. But here, with civilization hundreds of miles away, such niceties seemed absurdly trivial. "I'm afraid I'll slow you down terribly," she admitted as they resumed walking. Wade shook his head. "We've got time. Train won't reach Portland for another month. We'll get you to Shafter, then figure out how to get you to Oregon from there." Lucy glanced at him, touched by his confidence. "You make it sound so simple." The corner of his mouth quirked up. "Nothing simple about it. But dwelling on all the complications won't get us any further east." They walked until dusk began to paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. Lucy's legs felt like lead, and each step required more effort than the last. Finally, Wade called a halt in a small depression surrounded by scrubby brush. "We'll camp here for the night," he said. "There's a creek about 100 yards that way." He nodded eastward. "I'll fetch water while you rest." Lucy watched as he unsaddled Chance and set about making camp with practiced efficiency. He had their tent up in minutes, then gathered dry grass and twigs for a small fire. Lucy tried to help, but her hands were shaking with fatigue. "Sit," Wade ordered gently. "You can help tomorrow when you're stronger." Reluctantly, Lucy sat on a flat rock near the fire pit he'd constructed. "I'm not usually so helpless," she said, frustration coloring her voice. "I don't doubt it," Wade replied, striking a match to light the fire. "Fever takes a toll on even the strongest." As darkness fell, Wade prepared a simple meal of hardtack soaked in coffee and strips of dried beef. Lucy ate slowly, savoring each bite despite the plainness of the food. Her appetite had returned with a vengeance. "This is delicious," she said sincerely. Wade chuckled. "Now I know you're still feverish if you're calling this delicious." Lucy smiled, surprising herself. She hadn't expected to find anything to smile about today. When one is hungry enough, Mr. Wilson weighed even the simplest fare tastes like a feast. True enough. He sipped his coffee, studying her over the rim of the tin cup. "You should get some sleep. Tomorrow will be another long day." The reality of their situation suddenly pressed in on Lucy alone in the wilderness with a man she barely knew, miles from civilization. Propriety dictated she should be scandalized, terrified even. Yet she felt only gratitude and a curious sense of security in Wade's presence. "The tent is yours," Wade said, as if reading her thoughts. "I'll sleep out here by the fire." "That hardly seems fair," Lucy protested. "It's your tent." "And you're a lady recovering from illness," he countered. "Besides, I've slept under the stars more nights than I can count." Lucy wanted to argue but was too exhausted to put up much of a fight. "Thank you," she said simply. "For everything." Wade nodded, his expression unreadable in the firelight. "Get some rest, Lucy." Inside the small canvas tent, Lucy lay on her bedroll, listening to the night sounds of the prairie, the rustle of wind through grass, the distant howl of a coyote, the occasional snort from Chance. Outside, she could hear Wade moving around the campsite, adding wood to the fire, checking on his horse. She should have been terrified. She was alone, abandoned by the wagon train that carried her mother and brother, dependent on the kindness of a virtual stranger. Yet somehow, Wade's quiet "we'll go together" had kindled a flame of hope within her that refused to be extinguished. With that thought warming her like an invisible blanket, Lucy Sinclair drifted into the first peaceful sleep she'd had in days. Morning arrived with a symphony of birdsong and the aroma of coffee brewing over a rekindled fire. Lucy emerged from the tent feeling remarkably stronger than the day before. The fever had finally broken completely, and while she was still weak, her head was clear. Wade sat by the fire, whittling a stick with a small knife. He looked up as she approached, his expression softening slightly. "Morning," he said. "Coffee's ready if you want some." "Thank you," Lucy said, accepting the tin cup he offered. The coffee was strong and bitter, but she welcomed its warmth in the cool morning air. "Did you sleep well?" "Well enough," Wade replied, though the shadows under his eyes suggested otherwise. He poked at the small fire. "We should reach water by midday. There's a spring about 10 miles east that runs year-round." Lucy nodded, trying to ignore the fact that 10 miles seemed an impossible distance in her current state. "I feel much better today," she said, more to convince herself than him. Wade studied her face, his blue eyes missing nothing. "Good, but we'll still take it slow." They broke camp efficiently, Wade doing most of the work while Lucy folded her bedding and packed what few personal items she'd used. Within half an hour they were heading east again, the rising sun at their backs. The Wyoming Territory stretched before them, a sea of golden grass rippling in the gentle breeze. In the distance, the faint outline of mountains hovered like a mirage on the horizon. Despite the beauty, Lucy couldn't shake a sense of vulnerability. The vastness of the landscape made her feel insignificant, a mere speck in an indifferent wilderness. "What's Shafter like?" she asked after they'd been walking for an hour. Wade adjusted Chance's lead rope before answering. "Small, maybe 200 people. Got a general store, a blacksmith, 2 saloons, and a small church." He paused. "It's not much compared to Philadelphia, but the people are decent enough." "You've been there before," he nodded. "I winter there sometimes when I'm not guiding. Town's close enough to Fort Laramie that the Army keeps the area relatively safe, but far enough that they don't meddle much in town affairs." "You have family there?" Lucy asked, then immediately regretted the personal question when she saw his expression close off. "No," Wade said shortly. "No family anywhere anymore." Lucy wanted to apologize for prying, but sensed it would only make things more awkward. Instead, she changed the subject. "How long do you think it will take us to reach Shafter?" "For days, maybe 5 at our current pace," Wade replied, seeming relieved by the shift in conversation. Depends on the weather and how you're holding up. Lucy bit her lip, hating that she was the limiting factor. I'll try to move faster. Wade shook his head. No need to push yourself to collapse. Slow and steady will get us there. They walked in companionable silence for a while, the only sounds the rhythmic creak of leather from Chance's tack and the whisper of grass against their boots. Lucy found herself studying Wade's profile when he wasn't looking, the strong line of his jaw, the way he scanned the horizon constantly, alert for any sign of danger. Have you always been a guide? She asked eventually. Wade considered the question. No, grew up on a farm in Ohio. Worked as a ranch hand in Texas for a spell after the war. Then found my way north and discovered I had a knack for finding safe passages. It must be a lonely life, Lucy observed. Something flickered in Wade's eyes. It suits me. Lucy wondered what had happened to make solitude preferable for him, but knew better than to ask. Everyone who ventured west seemed to be running from something: poverty, scandal, loss. She herself was fleeing the suffocating expectations of Philadelphia society after her father's death had left them in reduced circumstances. By midday, as Wade had predicted, they reached a small spring bubbling up from between rocks to form a clear pool. Cottonwood trees provided blessed shade, and Lucy sank gratefully onto a fallen log while Wade watered Chance. We'll rest here for an hour or so, Wade said, handing her the canteen after refilling it. Give you a chance to catch your breath. Lucy was too exhausted to pretend she didn't need the rest. Her dress clung to her, damp with perspiration, and her feet throbbed inside her impractical city boots. She took a long drink, then pulled out a handkerchief to wipe her face. May I ask you something, Wade? She said after a moment. He was arranging some stones to form a small fire pit. You can ask. Why did you really come back for me? Lucy watched his hand still momentarily. You could have continued with the train. No one would have blamed you. Wade was quiet for so long that Lucy thought he might not answer. Then he straightened, his back still to her. When I was 19, I got separated from my unit during a skirmish near Fredericksburg, he said, his voice low. Took a bullet in the shoulder. Would have bled out if a farmer hadn't found me and taken me in. He turned to face her. He had no reason to help a half-dead Union soldier. Could have gotten him killed by either side. But he did it anyway. Wade's eyes met hers. Some debts you can't repay to the person who helped you. You can only pay them forward. Lucy nodded, understanding dawning. Well, I'm very grateful for that farmer then. The ghost of a smile touched Wade's lips. So am I. He built a small fire and heated water for coffee, then produced a packet of cornmeal from his saddlebags. With practiced hands, he mixed it with water and a pinch of salt, then cooked the mixture in a small pan until it formed a thick Johnny cake. It's not much, he said, breaking the cake in half and handing her a portion. It's wonderful, Lucy assured him, suddenly ravenous. The warm, slightly sweet cornmeal cake was indeed delicious after hours of walking. As they ate, Lucy found herself watching a pair of butterflies dancing above the spring, their yellow wings flashing in the sunlight. Such a small, perfect moment of beauty amid the harshness of their journey. She glanced at Wade and found him watching her, an unreadable expression in his eyes. What? She asked self-consciously. He shook his head slightly. Nothing. Just thinking it's good to see some color in your cheeks again. Lucy felt a blush warming those very cheeks. The fever is definitely gone, she said, looking away. They resumed their journey after the brief rest, the afternoon sun beating down relentlessly. Despite her determination to keep pace, Lucy found herself lagging behind as the hours wore on. Wade slowed his stride without comment, occasionally glancing back to ensure she was still following. By late afternoon, Dark clouds had gathered on the western horizon, and a cool wind began to blow. "Storm's coming," Wade said, frowning at the sky. "We need to find shelter." Lucy's heart sank. They were in the middle of open prairie with no trees or rock formations in sight. "Where?" Wade scanned the landscape, then pointed to a slight depression about half a mile ahead. "There. It's not much, but it's lower ground, might offer some protection from the wind." They quickened their pace as much as Lucy's tired legs would allow. By the time they reached the shallow ravine, the wind had strengthened considerably, and the first fat raindrops were beginning to fall. Wade worked swiftly, setting up the tent in the most sheltered spot he could find, while Lucy gathered stones to secure the edges. Just as they finished, the skies opened and rain began to pour down in sheets. "Get inside," Wade urged, helping her into the small tent. He followed with their essential supplies, leaving Chance tethered nearby with a blanket draped over his back for minimal protection. Inside the tent, they sat in cramped quarters, listening to the rain pelt the canvas. The small space seemed to shrink further as they sheltered together, their shoulders nearly touching. Lucy could smell the leather of Wade's vest, the faint scent of tobacco that clung to his clothes, and something else: clean sweat and sun-warmed skin. "How long do you think it will last?" she asked, trying to distract herself from their proximity. Wade shrugged. "Hard to say. These prairie storms can blow over quickly or last for hours." A brilliant flash of lightning illuminated the tent, followed almost immediately by a deafening crack of thunder. Lucy jumped involuntarily, her hand instinctively grasping Wade's arm. "Sorry," she said, quickly withdrawing her touch. "I've never liked thunderstorms." "Nothing to apologize for," Wade said. "They can be fearsome out here with no buildings to shelter in." Another lightning strike, another crash of thunder. This time, Lucy merely flinched. "When I was a child," Wade said suddenly, "my mother told me thunder was just the angels moving furniture in heaven." A corner of his mouth lifted. Ridiculous notion, but it made storms less frightening somehow. Lucy smiled at the unexpected glimpse into his childhood. "My father said it was God bowling. Each strike was a thunderclap." Wade chuckled, the sound warming the chilly tent. "I like that one." They sat in companionable silence as the storm raged around them. The temperature dropped rapidly, and Lucy found herself shivering despite her woolen travel dress. Without a word, Wade removed his leather vest and draped it around her shoulders. "Here," he said. "It's not much, but it's an extra layer." "But you'll be cold," Lucy protested. "I'm used to it," he said simply. The vest was still warm from his body, and it carried his scent more strongly. Lucy pulled it closer around herself, grateful for both the warmth and the unexpected kindness. "Thank you, Wade," she said softly. "Not just for the vest, but for everything. I don't know what would have happened to me if you hadn't come back." Wade's blue eyes met hers in the dim light. "You're stronger than you know, Lucy Sinclair. You would have found a way." Something in his gaze made her breath catch. For a moment, the storm outside faded away, and there was only the two of them, sheltered together against the wilderness, connected by circumstance but perhaps something more. The moment broke when a particularly violent gust of wind buffeted the tent, causing the canvas to billow inward. Wade reached up to steady the center pole, his arm brushing against hers in the process. "We should try to get some rest," he said, his voice rougher than before. "Storm might last all night." Lucy nodded, though she doubted she could sleep with the thunder and their close proximity. Still, she obediently arranged her bedroll on her side of the tent, while Wade did the same on his. They lay side by side, not touching but close enough that Lucy could feel the heat radiating from his body. Outside, the storm continued its assault, rain drumming against the canvas, wind howling across the prairie. Wade, Lucy whispered after several minutes of lying in silence. "HM, do you think we'll make it to Shafter before winter sets in?" Wade was quiet for a moment. "Yes," he finally said. "And from there, we'll find a way to get you to Oregon." The simple conviction in his voice soothed her more than any elaborate reassurances could have. Lucy closed her eyes, allowing the steady rhythm of Wade's breathing beside her to lull her toward sleep. "We'll go together," he had said, and somehow, in the midst of abandonment and wilderness, those words had become her anchor. Morning dawned clear and cool, the storm having moved eastward during the night. Lucy awoke to find herself alone in the tent, the space beside her empty save for Wade's neatly rolled bedding. She sat up, pushing her disheveled hair from her face, and wondered how he had managed to leave without waking her. Outside, she found him tending to Chance and a small breakfast fire. He looked up as she emerged, a tin cup of coffee already prepared. "Morning," he said, offering the cup. "Sleep well." Lucy accepted the coffee gratefully. "Better than I expected, considering the storm." She glanced around at the rain-soaked prairie. "Everything's so fresh this morning." Wade nodded. "Rain's good out here. Settles the dust, at least." They ate a quick breakfast of hardtack and dried apples, then broke camp efficiently. The ground was soggy underfoot as they set out, making for slower going than the previous day. By mid-morning, however, the strengthening sun had dried the trail considerably, and they were able to maintain a steady pace eastward. Lucy found herself stronger than the day before, the lingering effects of her fever finally dissipating completely. She walked beside Wade, occasionally asking questions about the landscape or his experiences as a guide. To her surprise, he became more talkative as the day progressed, sharing stories of buffalo hunts and encounters with various Indian tribes. "The Cheyenne control much of this territory," he explained as they crossed a shallow stream around noon. "They're generally peaceful if respected, but the Army's been pushing them hard since the war ended." "Have you had trouble with them?" Lucy asked. Wade shook his head. "I speak enough of their language to get by, and I've always dealt fairly with them. Makes a difference." He helped her up the muddy bank. "Most trouble comes from misunderstandings or deliberate provocation." "You sound like you admire them," Lucy observed. "I respect them," Wade corrected. "They've lived on this land for generations, know it better than any white man ever will." He adjusted his hat against the sun. "Doesn't seem right how they're being treated." Lucy considered his words. In Philadelphia, Indians were spoken of as savage obstacles to progress, their resistance to settlement portrayed as mindless violence rather than defense of their homeland. Wade's perspective challenged everything she'd been taught. "My father used to say that people fear what they don't understand," she said after a moment, "and fear makes us cruel." Wade glanced at her, surprise and something like approval in his eyes. "Your father sounds like a wise man." "He was," Lucy said softly. "He treated everyone the same, regardless of their station or background. It wasn't always appreciated in Philadelphia society." They walked in silence for a while, each lost in thought. The day grew warmer, and Lucy was grateful when Wade suggested they rest in the shade of a small copse of cottonwoods that appeared on the horizon around mid-afternoon. As they approached the trees, Wade suddenly raised his hand, signaling for her to stop. His posture changed, tension visible in every line of his body. "What is it?" Lucy whispered, fear prickling along her spine. Wade's hand moved to the revolver at his hip. "Someone's there," he murmured. "Stay behind me." Lucy's heart hammered as Wade cautiously led them closer to the trees. She could see nothing unusual, but clearly his experienced eyes had detected something that concerned him. When they were about 50 yards from the cottonwoods, A figure emerged from the shadows, a man leading a horse, his arm held awkwardly across his body. "He's injured," Wade said, relaxing slightly but keeping his hand near his weapon. "Stay here with Chance." Lucy watched anxiously as Wade approached the stranger. They conversed briefly, then Wade gestured for her to join them. She led Chance forward, studying the newcomer as she approached. He was a young man, perhaps 25, with sandy hair and a face reddened by sun exposure. His left arm was bound in a crude sling made from a torn shirt, and he looked exhausted. "Lucy, this is Thomas Garrett," Wade introduced them. "Mr. Garrett, Miss Lucy Sinclair." "Madam," Thomas said, attempting a polite nod despite his obvious pain. "Mr. Garrett was thrown from his horse yesterday," Wade explained. "Dislocated his shoulder and spent the night in these trees during the storm." "How terrible," Lucy said sympathetically. "Are you traveling alone, Mr. Garrett?" "Yes, madam. Heading to Shafter to meet my brother. He's got work for me at his ranch outside town." Thomas winced as he shifted his weight. "Don't suppose either of you knows how to set a shoulder," Wade stepped forward. "I've done it before." "It won't be pleasant." Thomas grimaced but nodded. "Can't ride like this anyway. Do what you have to." Wade instructed Lucy to prepare a place for Thomas to lie down, then helped the injured man to the ground. Lucy watched nervously as Wade examined the shoulder, his hands gentle but confident. "On three," Wade said, positioning himself. One, without warning, he gave a sharp, practiced movement, and Thomas's shoulder popped back into place with an audible sound. Thomas let out a strangled cry, then immediately relaxed, his face going slack with relief. "Lord Almighty," he gasped. "That's better already." "The sudden movement works better," Wade explained, helping Thomas sit up. "Less time to tense up." Lucy retrieved their water canteen and offered it to the grateful man. "Are you able to travel, Mr. Garrett? We're also headed to Shafter." "I can ride now that the shoulder's back where it belongs," Thomas said, taking a careful drink. "Though I'd be obliged for the company. Been on my own since Fort Laramie." Wade and Lucy exchanged glances. Another traveler meant another set of eyes to watch for danger, but also another mouth to feed from their limited supplies. "We're moving slowly," Wade said. "Miss Sinclair is recovering from illness." Thomas nodded, understanding. "I'm in no hurry. My brother isn't expecting me for another week." The decision was made without further discussion. They would travel together to Shafter. Thomas's presence altered their small party's dynamic, introducing conversation where there had been companionable silence. He was a talkative young man, eager to share stories of his journey from St. Louis and his plans to help his brother establish a horse breeding operation. "Finest Morgan horses you've ever seen," he enthused as they resumed their eastward trek, Thomas now riding his horse while Wade continued to lead Chance. "My brother James has a real eye for horseflesh." Lucy found herself warming to Thomas's cheerful nature, though she noticed Wade becoming increasingly quiet as the afternoon progressed. She wondered if he was regretting the decision to allow the injured man to join them. That evening, they made camp in a natural hollow that offered some protection from the wind. Thomas, despite his injury, insisted on helping gather firewood, leaving Lucy and Wade alone for a few minutes. "Are you all right?" Lucy asked quietly as Wade arranged stones for the fire pit. "You've been very quiet." Wade glanced up at her, then resumed his work. "Just thinking." He hesitated, then straightened. "Having Garrett with us changes things, makes us more visible." "Is that dangerous?" Lucy asked, suddenly concerned. "Not necessarily," Wade said. "But it's something to be aware of. 3 travelers attract more attention than 2. Lucy studied his face, sensing there was more he wasn't saying. "You don't trust him." "I don't know him," Wade corrected, "but his story checks out." Shoulder was genuinely dislocated, and he's heading where he says he is. He softened slightly at her worried expression. Don't fret, just being cautious. Thomas returned with an armload of deadfall, his good cheer seemingly unaffected by his injury. Found some wild onions too, he announced, pulling several bulbs from his pocket. Might improve our supper a bit. Lucy smiled gratefully. That's wonderful, Mr. Garrett. Thank you. As the men prepared the meal, Lucy found herself observing the differences between them. Thomas was open, expressive, his emotions playing across his face like words on a page. Wade, in contrast, kept himself carefully contained, revealing little of his thoughts or feelings. Yet it was Wade's steady presence that made her feel safe, his quiet strength more reassuring than Thomas's cheerful banter. That night, Wade insisted on taking the first watch while Lucy and Thomas slept. The addition of another person meant the tent was too crowded for comfort, so the men decided to sleep outside, leaving Lucy the privacy of the canvas shelter. "Are you sure you'll be warm enough?" she asked as Wade spread his bedroll near the fire. "We'll be fine," he assured her. "The fire will last most of the night." Lucy nodded and retreated to the tent, but sleep eluded her. Through the canvas, she could hear Thomas and Wade talking in low voices. Thomas's animated tones contrasted with Wade's measured responses, the conversation flowing easily between them, despite Wade's initial reservations. She found herself straining to hear Wade's voice, realizing how much she had come to value their quiet conversations. There was a depth to him that intrigued her, layers hidden beneath his reserved exterior. In the 3 days since they had left the wagon train, she had glimpsed occasional cracks in his carefully maintained facade, a dry humor, an unexpected gentleness, flashes of passion when he spoke of things that mattered to him. Lucy pulled her blanket closer, suddenly aware of a feeling she hadn't anticipated, a twinge of something like jealousy that Wade was now sharing his rare conversation with someone else. The feeling was irrational, she knew. Wade had no obligation to her beyond seeing her safely to Shafter. Yet somehow, in the vast emptiness of the prairie, a connection had formed between them, tenuous but real. With these unsettling thoughts, Lucy finally drifted into a restless sleep, dreaming of wagon trains disappearing over horizons and a deep voice promising, "We'll go together." The following day brought clear skies and warmer temperatures. Lucy awoke feeling refreshed despite her troubled thoughts the night before. Outside the tent, she found Wade already awake and tending the fire while Thomas snored softly, his injured arm cradled against his chest. "Morning," Wade said quietly, offering her coffee. "Good morning." Lucy accepted the cup, noticing the shadows under his eyes. "Did you sleep at all?" Wade shrugged. "Enough." He nodded toward the eastern horizon where the sun was just beginning to paint the sky with pale gold. "Should reach the North Platte River by midday. We can follow it most of the way to Shafter." "That's good news," Lucy said, sipping her coffee. The bitter liquid was becoming almost pleasant after several days on the trail. "How's Mr. Garrett's shoulder?" "Better than it should be," Wade replied with a slight frown. "Man recovers quick." Something in his tone made Lucy look at him more closely. "You still don't trust him?" Wade met her gaze, his blue eyes serious. "Just keeping my guard up. Out here it pays to be cautious." Before Lucy could respond, Thomas stirred and sat up, blinking in the early morning light. "Morning, folks," he said cheerfully. "Fine day for traveling, isn't it?" They broke camp quickly and set out, following a faint trail that Wade said would lead them to the river. Thomas rode his horse while Lucy and Wade walked, leading Chance. The addition of another mount had changed their traveling configuration, and Lucy found herself missing the easy rhythm she and Wade had established over the previous days. Thomas kept up a steady stream of conversation as they traveled, telling stories about his childhood in Missouri and his adventures traveling west. He directed many of his comments to Lucy, his interest in her becoming increasingly obvious as the morning progressed. "A lady like you must have had many suitors back in Philadelphia," he remarked at one point. "What brings you all the way out to Oregon?" Lucy explained about her father's death and her mother's decision to join her uncle. She didn't mention being abandoned by the wagon train, feeling strangely protective of that part of her story, the part that had brought Wade into her life. "A shame about your father," Thomas said sympathetically, "but perhaps a blessing in disguise if it brings such a charming lady to these parts. We're sorely lacking in refined company out west." Lucy murmured a polite thank you, uncomfortably aware of Wade walking silently ahead of them. Something about Thomas's compliments felt hollow compared to Wade's simple acts of kindness. By midday, as Wade had predicted, they reached the North Platte River, a broad, shallow waterway winding through the prairie. The sight of so much water after days of carefully rationing their supply was welcoming. They stopped to rest and water the horses, finding a shady spot beneath a cluster of cottonwoods that grew along the riverbank. Lucy removed her boots and stockings to dip her tired feet in the cool water, sighing with relief as the current swirled around her ankles. "Feels wonderful, doesn't it?" Thomas said, settling beside her on the bank. "Nothing like a river after days on the dusty trail." Lucy nodded, conscious of maintaining a proper distance between them despite the casual setting. "It's a magnificent country," she said, gazing across the river to the rolling hills beyond. "So vast and untamed." "It is that," Thomas agreed. "Takes a special kind of woman to appreciate its beauty and endure its hardships." He gave her an admiring glance. "You're made of stronger stuff than most Eastern ladies, Miss Sinclair." Before Lucy could respond to this flattery, Wade approached from upstream where he'd been scouting their route. "River's running low," he reported. "We can ford it easily about a quarter-mile north, then follow the east bank to Shafter." Thomas stood, brushing dirt from his trousers. "Excellent. We're making better time than I expected. We should reach Shafter by tomorrow evening if the weather holds," Wade continued, his eyes briefly meeting Lucy's before moving away. "Best get moving if we want to cover good distance before dark." Lucy retrieved her stockings and boots, noting the subtle change in Wade's demeanor. There was a tension in his shoulders that hadn't been there before, a guardedness in his expression when he looked at Thomas. She wondered again what had caused his distrust. They forded the river without incident, the water barely reaching the horses' knees at its deepest point. Once on the eastern bank, they continued their journey, the river a constant companion on their right. The terrain became more varied, with occasional stands of trees breaking the monotony of the prairie. By late afternoon, dark clouds had gathered in the west, and a cool wind began to pick up. Wade studied the sky with a practiced eye. "Another storm coming," he said grimly. "Bigger than yesterday's." "There's a line of bluffs ahead," Thomas pointed out. "Might find shelter there." Wade nodded. "Let's push on. We want solid cover before that hits." They quickened their pace, the horses sensing the urgency and moving more willingly. Lucy felt the first cold drops of rain just as they reached the bluff's steep, eroded formations rising 30 feet above the riverbank. "There," Thomas called, pointing to a dark opening at the base of the nearest bluff. "Looks like a cave or overhang." Wade approached cautiously, his hand near his revolver. After a brief inspection, he beckoned them forward. "It's shallow but dry, big enough for all of us and the horses." They hurried into the natural shelter just as the rain began in earnest. The space was indeed a shallow cave, its ceiling just high enough for them to stand upright, its depth perhaps 15 feet. The floor was sandy and dry, sloping gently upward toward the back. River carved this out during flooding, Wade explained, unsaddling Chance. Good thing it's running low now, or we'd be looking at wet bedrolls tonight. The storm arrived with full fury moments later, wind driving the rain nearly horizontally across the prairie. Lightning split the sky in jagged patterns, followed by thunder that seemed to shake the very ground beneath them. "Glad we're not out in that," Thomas remarked, settling his back against the cave wall. "You've got good instincts, Wilson." Wade merely nodded, busying himself with arranging their supplies. The close quarters meant they were all within arm's reach of each other, their usual camp layout impossible in the confined space. Lucy helped Wade organize their food stores, taking inventory of what remained. "We're getting low on everything," she said quietly. "Will it be enough until Shafter?" "Should be," Wade replied. "We can supplement with fish from the river if needed." Thomas overheard. "I'm a fair hand with a fishing line," he offered. "Could try my luck once the storm passes." "That would be helpful," Lucy said with a grateful smile. As evening fell, the cave grew darker until Wade lit a small fire near the entrance, using the driest wood they had managed to gather before the rain began. The flames cast flickering shadows on the stone walls, creating an almost cozy atmosphere despite the storm raging outside. They shared a meager supper of the last of their dried beef and hardtack, supplemented with a handful of parched corn Wade produced from his saddlebag. The meal was simple but satisfying, and Lucy found herself surprisingly content despite the circumstances. "Miss Sinclair," Thomas said as they finished eating, "would you honor us with a song? Nights like this call for some entertainment." Lucy hesitated. "I'm afraid I'm not much of a singer, Mr. Garrett." "I don't believe that for a second," Thomas insisted. "A cultured lady like yourself must have had musical training." "Leave her be, Garrett," Wade said quietly. "She's tired." Thomas looked between them, a speculative gleam in his eye. "Just trying to lighten the mood, Wilson. No harm in that." An awkward silence fell, broken only by the sound of rain and the occasional rumble of thunder. Lucy found herself watching the interplay between the two men, sensing an undercurrent she didn't fully understand. "I could tell a story instead," she offered, wanting to ease the tension. "My father was fond of storytelling on winter evenings." Both men accepted this compromise, and Lucy began recounting a tale her father had often told, the story of a traveler who discovered a hidden valley where spring lasted all year round. As she spoke, she noticed Wade's expression softening, the guardedness in his eyes giving way to genuine interest. When she finished, Thomas applauded appreciatively. "Wonderfully told, Miss Sinclair. You have quite a gift." "Thank you," Lucy said, suddenly self-conscious. "It loses something in my telling. My father could make you feel as if you were actually there." "I thought it was perfect," Wade said quietly, his eyes meeting hers across the fire. Something in his gaze made her heart beat faster. The sincerity in his simple compliment meant more than Thomas's effusive praise. The evening wore on, the storm showing no signs of abating. Eventually they prepared for sleep, arranging their bedrolls in the limited space available. Privacy was impossible, but exhaustion overrode concerns about propriety. "I'll take first watch," Wade volunteered, settling near the cave entrance. "No need for watches here," Thomas argued. "We're well sheltered, and no one's moving in this weather." Wade's expression remained resolute. "Better safe than sorry. I'll wake you for the second shift." Thomas shrugged and arranged his bedroll on one side of the cave, while Lucy placed hers near the back, as far from both men as the small space allowed. Despite her fatigue, sleep eluded her as she listened to the storm and watched the firelight play across Wade's profile as he sat vigilant at the entrance. She must have dozed eventually, for she awoke with a start to the sound of hushed voices. The fire had burned low, casting the cave in deep shadows. Lucy lay still, realizing Wade and Thomas were speaking in urgent whispers near the entrance. "Knew I recognized you," Thomas was saying. "You rode with Sherman in '64. "You're mistaken." Wade's voice was tense, barely audible. "No mistake. You were a scout for the Union, helped burn half of Georgia." Thomas's tone held an edge now. "My family lost everything in that campaign." "That was war," Wade replied flatly. "It's over now. Not for some of us." A pause. "Don't worry, Wilson. I'm not looking for revenge. Just interesting to find you out here playing hero to a pretty Eastern girl. Leave Miss Sinclair out of this. Protective, aren't you? She know about your war record. The farms you torched, the families you left homeless." Lucy held her breath, straining to hear Wade's response. "We've all done things we regret, Garrett. I'm guessing that's why you're out here too." A long silence followed, broken only by the continued patter of rain outside the cave. Finally, Thomas spoke again, his voice softer. "Fair enough. Past is past, but I'd watch my back if I were you. Not everyone's willing to let bygones be bygones." The conversation ended there, and Lucy heard movement as the men returned to their respective positions. She lay awake for a long time afterward, thinking about what she'd overheard. The revelation of Wade's role in the war troubled her. Not because she judged him for it, the war had forced terrible choices on many good men, but because she sensed the burden of guilt he carried. When morning came, the storm had passed, leaving behind a washed, clean world. Lucy emerged from the cave to find Wade already tending to the horses, his face betraying no sign of the night's tense conversation. "Sleep well?" he asked as she approached. Lucy nodded, deciding not to reveal that she had overheard his exchange with Thomas. "The storm kept waking me," she said instead, "but the cave was a fortunate find." Wade smiled slightly. "We got lucky." He glanced toward the cave where Thomas was still sleeping. "We should reach Shafter by evening. The trail follows the river most of the way." "What will happen when we reach town?" Lucy asked, the question that had been building in her mind finally finding voice. Wade paused in adjusting Chance's saddle. "You'll be safe there. Sheriff's a good man, and there's a decent boarding house where you can stay while we figure out how to get you to Oregon." "We," Lucy repeated, catching the word. Wade's eyes met hers, something unspoken passing between them. "I said we'd go together. I meant it." Before Lucy could respond, Thomas emerged from the cave, stretching his good arm above his head. "Morning, folks," he called cheerfully, as if the night's tense exchange had never happened. "Ready to make Shafter by sundown." They broke camp quickly, eager to cover the remaining distance to town. The trail along the river was muddy from the night's rain but passable, and they made good time throughout the morning. Lucy found herself walking beside Wade while Thomas rode ahead, scouting the path. "Wade," she said quietly when they were alone, "may I ask you something personal?" He glanced at her, wariness in his blue eyes. "You can ask." Lucy hesitated, then decided directness was best. "During the war, what you did, was it very terrible?" Wade's step faltered momentarily, then resumed. "Who told you, Garrett?" "I overheard you talking last night," Lucy admitted. "I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but the cave was small." Wade was silent for so long that Lucy feared he wouldn't answer. Finally, he spoke, his voice low. "I was a scout for Sherman's army during the march to the sea. My job was to find paths for the troops, identify targets, sometimes lead raids on supply depots." His jaw tightened. It was war, and we did what we thought was necessary to end it quickly. You don't have to justify yourself to me, Lucy said gently. Wade looked at her then, his expression vulnerable in a way she hadn't seen before. Don't I? You're an educated Eastern lady. Your people probably saw us as barbarians. My father was a doctor who treated wounded soldiers from both sides, Lucy replied. He believed no one emerges from war with clean hands, and that compassion is needed afterward more than judgment. Something shifted in Wade's eyes, a lessening of the guard he kept so carefully in place. Your father sounds like a remarkable man. He was, Lucy said softly. And he would have approved of what you've done for me. They walked in silence after that, a new understanding between them. Lucy found herself studying Wade's profile, seeing him differently now, not just as the steady, capable guide who had saved her, but as a man with a complex past and his own burdens to bear. By midday, the landscape began to change subtly. The river curved eastward, and the terrain became more varied, with gentle hills rising on their left. Occasionally, they spotted distant herds of cattle, signs of approaching civilization after days in the wilderness. First ranches outside Shafter, Wade explained when Lucy commented on the change. Town's only about 10 miles ahead now. Thomas, who had rejoined them for a brief rest, grinned broadly. Civilization at last. A proper meal and a real bed tonight, Miss Sinclair. Lucy smiled politely, but found herself oddly ambivalent about reaching town. The journey had been difficult, certainly, but also strangely freeing. Out here, the rigid social conventions of Philadelphia seemed distant and meaningless. She had discovered strengths she hadn't known she possessed, and a simpler way of living that held its own appeal. And then there was Wade. In Shafter, their paths might diverge. He had fulfilled his promise to see her safely to town, and she had no claim on him beyond that. The thought brought an unexpected ache to her heart. As they resumed their journey, Lucy found herself treasuring each moment, the way sunlight filtered through the cottonwood leaves, the gentle sound of the river beside them, even the familiar creak of Chance's saddle as Wade led him along the trail. These simple things had become the texture of her days, and soon they would be replaced by the hustle and complications of town life. Late in the afternoon, they crested a low rise and Wade paused, pointing ahead. Shafter, he said simply. Lucy followed his gesture and saw, nestled in a bend of the river about 2 miles distant, a collection of buildings, some wooden structures with false fronts typical of western towns, others more substantial constructions of stone or brick. A church steeple rose above the other buildings, and smoke curled from multiple chimneys. After days on the empty prairie, the sight of human habitation seemed almost unreal. Home sweet home, Thomas said with satisfaction. Well, temporarily at least. My brother's ranch is about 5 miles north of town. They continued toward Shafter, the trail becoming a more defined road as they approached. Lucy felt a growing nervousness that she couldn't entirely explain. Her appearance was hardly presentable after days on the trail, her dress stained and wrinkled, her hair hastily braided without benefit of proper brushing, her face sun-browned despite her bonnet. As if sensing her discomfort, Wade dropped back to walk beside her. Sheriff Mills will know how to get word to your mother that you're safe, he said, and Mrs. Hollister runs a clean boarding house where you can stay. Thank you, Lucy said, touched by his consideration. I admit I'm rather nervous about arriving in such a state. Wade's mouth quirked in a rare half-smile. You look fine, Lucy, better than most who come through Shafter. The simple compliment warmed her more than it should have. You're kind to say so. Not kind, honest. His eyes met hers briefly before returning to the trail ahead. Always have been. They approached the outskirts of town, as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon. The buildings grew more distinct: a livery stable, a blacksmith shop with its forge still glowing, a general store with goods displayed in a glass window. People moved about the street, pausing occasionally to glance at the newcomers with the natural curiosity of a small town. Thomas, who had been riding ahead, suddenly raised his arm and waved enthusiastically. "James," he called out, "over here." Lucy saw a man detach himself from a group near the livery stable and stride toward them. The family resemblance was clear: the same sandy hair and lanky build, though the older Garrett had a more weathered face and a full beard. "Tommy, you old reprobate," James Garrett called, clapping his brother on his good shoulder after he dismounted. "Didn't expect you for another week." His gaze shifted to Wade and Lucy. "And you've brought company." "This is Miss Lucy Sinclair and Mr. Wade Wilson," Thomas introduced them. "They kindly allowed me to travel with them after I took a fall from thunder here and dislocated my shoulder." James nodded politely to Lucy, then extended his hand to Wade. "James Garrett, much obliged to you for helping my brother. He's got a knack for finding trouble." "No trouble," Wade said, shaking the offered hand. "We were headed this way ourselves." James looked between Wade and Lucy with open curiosity. "Well, you must all be exhausted. Let me stand you to dinner at the hotel. Least I can do." Before Wade could respond, a new voice called out from across the street. "Wilson, thought that was you." Lucy turned to see a barrel-chested man with a silver star pinned to his vest approaching them. His weathered face broke into a grin as he reached them, extending a beefy hand to Wade. "Sheriff Mills," Wade said, accepting the handshake. "Good to see you." "Didn't expect you back until winter," the sheriff said, his shrewd eyes taking in Lucy's presence with interest. "Usually you're guiding trains through until the first snow." "Change of plans," Wade said simply. "Sheriff, this is Miss Lucy Sinclair. She was traveling with the Foster train but got separated. We need to get word to her family in Oregon that she's safe." Sheriff Mills tipped his hat respectfully to Lucy. "Madam, sorry to hear about your troubles, but you're in good hands with Wilson here. Best scout in the territory. He's been very kind," Lucy said, warming to the sheriff's forthright manner. "I owe him my life." The sheriff's eyebrows rose slightly. "That's so? Well, I'd like to hear that story sometime." He turned back to Wade. "Foster's train came through Fort Laramie last week. Said they lost a passenger to fever." "That would be you, I reckon, Miss Sinclair." Lucy nodded, anger flaring at the confirmation that Jeremiah Foster had indeed reported her dead. "Yes, though as you can see, reports of my death were greatly exaggerated." Sheriff Mills chuckled. "Mark Twain couldn't have put it better." He scratched his chin thoughtfully. "Telegraph office closes at sunset, but first thing tomorrow we can wire Fort Laramie. They'll get word to the train when it passes through." "Thank you, Sheriff," Lucy said gratefully. "My mother must be beside herself with worry." "Meanwhile," James Garrett interjected, "my dinner invitation stands. You all look like you could use a hot meal." Sheriff Mills nodded approvingly. "Good idea, Garrett. The hotel dining room serves until 8. I join you, but I've got rounds to make." He tipped his hat again. "Miss Sinclair, pleasure to meet you. Wilson, stop by my office tomorrow. Might have some work for you." As the sheriff walked away, James led them toward a 2-story building with Shafter Hotel painted across its false front. Lucy found herself walking beside Wade, acutely aware of the curious glances they were receiving from townspeople. "Everyone seems to know you," she observed quietly. Wade nodded. "I winter here most years. People get used to seeing me come and go." "And yet you told me you're not much for towns," Lucy said, remembering their earlier conversations. A ghost of a smile touched Wade's lips. "I'm not. But even a loner needs supplies and occasional company." The hotel's dining room was simply furnished but clean, with white tablecloths and oil lamps providing a warm glow. Lucy was painfully conscious of her travel-stained appearance as James secured them a table, but the other diners seemed more curious than judgmental. "First thing tomorrow, we'll get you settled at Mrs. Hollister's boarding house," Wade said as they reviewed the menu, a simple offering of beefsteak, fried potatoes, and apple pie. "It's clean and respectable, and she doesn't ask too many questions." "You're very thoughtful," Lucy said, touched by his continued concern for her comfort. "But what about you? Where will you stay?" "I have a room above the livery stable that I keep year-round," Wade replied. "Nothing fancy, but it serves." The meal was simple but delicious after days of trail rations, and Lucy found herself enjoying the company despite her fatigue. James Garrett proved to be an engaging host, sharing stories about establishing his ranch and the challenges of life in the Wyoming Territory. Thomas contributed occasionally, his easy charm directed primarily at Lucy, while Wade ate quietly, speaking only when directly addressed. As the meal concluded, James insisted on paying the bill, waving away Wade's attempt to contribute. "Consider it thanks for looking after my foolish brother," he said. "Now, Tommy and I should head to the ranch before it gets too dark. Miss Sinclair, it was a pleasure. If you need anything during your stay in Shafter, don't hesitate to ask." After the Garrett brothers departed, Lucy and Wade were left alone at the table, an unexpected awkwardness between them. Outside, dusk had fallen, the town's main street now illuminated by lamplight from windows and the occasional street lantern. "It's too late to trouble Mrs. Hollister tonight," Wade said after a moment. "The hotel should have a room available for you." Lucy nodded, suddenly overwhelmed by the realization that their journey together was ending. In the space of a few days, this quiet, reserved man had become important to her in ways she couldn't fully articulate. "Wade," she began, not entirely sure what she wanted to say. Before she could continue, the dining room door opened, and a woman in an elegant burgundy dress entered, accompanied by an older gentleman in a well-cut suit. The woman paused, her eyes widening as they fell on Wade. "Wade Wilson," she said, her voice carrying across the room. "I thought you were out guiding wagon trains." Wade stood, his expression carefully neutral. "Miss Harrington, Mr. Blackwell, good evening." Lucy watched as the woman approached their table, taking in her elaborate coiffure and the quality of her clothing, clearly the finest Shafter had to offer. She was beautiful in a polished way, perhaps 30 years old, with golden hair arranged in fashionable curls. "Aren't you going to introduce me to your companion?" Miss Harrington asked, her gaze assessing Lucy with barely concealed curiosity. "Of course," Wade said stiffly. "Miss Victoria Harrington, Mr. Elias Blackwell, this is Miss Lucy Sinclair." "Lucy, Miss Harrington is the daughter of Harold Harrington, who owns the bank. Mr. Blackwell is the bank's manager." "How do you do?" Lucy said politely, acutely aware of her disheveled appearance in contrast to Victoria's finery. "Miss Sinclair was separated from her wagon train," Wade explained. "I'm helping her arrange passage to Oregon." "How fortunate for her that you happened along," Victoria said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "You always did have a tendency to collect strays, Wade." Lucy felt herself flush at the implied insult, but before she could respond, Wade spoke, his voice cooler than Lucy had ever heard it. "Miss Sinclair is a lady from Philadelphia who experienced misfortune on the trail. There's nothing stray about her." Victoria's smile tightened. "Of course, I meant no offense." She turned to her companion. "Elias, I believe our table is ready." As they moved away, Lucy released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "I take it you and Miss Harrington have a history," Wade sat back down, his jaw tight. Briefly, 2 winters ago, he met Lucy's gaze. She thought she could reform the rough scout into suitable husband material. I thought she might be less concerned with appearances than she was. We were both wrong. I'm sorry, Lucy said softly. Wade shrugged. Don't be. We weren't suited. He glanced toward Victoria's table, then back to Lucy. We should get you checked in. You must be exhausted. The hotel had one room available, a small but clean chamber on the second floor with a narrow bed, washstand, and window overlooking the main street. The clerk provided a pitcher of hot water and clean towels, luxuries that seemed almost decadent after days on the trail. I'll come for you at 9 tomorrow, Wade said as they stood awkwardly in the hallway outside her door. We'll send that telegraph and get you settled at Mrs. Hollister's. Lucy nodded, suddenly reluctant to say good night. There was so much unsaid between them, so many questions about what would happen next. Wade, she began, but faltered, uncertain how to express the tumult of her feelings. Wade waited, his blue eyes searching her face. Yes, thank you, she said finally, the words wholly inadequate. For everything. Something flickered in his eyes, disappointment, relief. She couldn't tell. Get some rest, Lucy, he said gently. Tomorrow will be a busy day. With that, he turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing down the wooden staircase. Lucy entered her room and closed the door, leaning against it as unexpected tears pricked at her eyes. They had reached Shafter safely, just as he had promised. She should have felt only relief and gratitude. Instead, she felt as if she were losing something precious before she had fully recognized its value. Lucy woke early the next morning, having slept fitfully despite her exhaustion. The narrow hotel bed had felt oddly uncomfortable after nights under the stars, and dreams of wagon trains and stormy prairies had disturbed her rest. She rose and went to the window, drawing aside the faded curtain to look down on Shafter's Main Street. The town was already stirring to life, shopkeepers sweeping their wooden sidewalks, a wagon loaded with barrels rumbling past, cowboys emerging from the saloon where they had apparently spent the night. It was a frontier town, rough-edged but vital, nothing like the elegant, established Philadelphia she had left behind. Yet something about its raw energy appealed to her. These people were building something new, carving a life from the wilderness through sheer determination. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. Miss Sinclair, it's Sarah, the hotel maid. I've brought fresh water and towels. Lucy opened the door to admit a young woman carrying a pitcher and an armful of linens. Thank you, Sarah, she said gratefully. I was just thinking how wonderful it would be to wash properly. Been on the trail, have you? Sarah asked sympathetically, setting down her burdens. My family came by wagon from Ohio 2 years ago. Thought I'd never feel clean again. She hesitated, then added, begging your pardon, miss, but Mrs. Thornton said to tell you she'd be happy to press your dress while you have breakfast if you'd like. Mrs. Thornton, the hotel owner's wife. She does laundry and mending. Sarah glanced at Lucy's travel-stained dress. She thought you might appreciate it, being new in town and all. Lucy felt a rush of gratitude for this unexpected kindness. Please thank Mrs. Thornton and tell her I would be most appreciative. After Sarah departed, Lucy used the fresh water to wash thoroughly, reveling in the simple luxury of soap and clean towels. She had just finished rebraiding her hair when another knock came at her door. Lucy, it's Wade. Her heart quickened at the sound of his voice. She smoothed her dress as best she could and opened the door. Wade stood in the hallway, freshly shaven and wearing a clean shirt beneath his familiar leather vest. He looked different somehow, still the capable guide who had brought her safely to Shafter, but now also a man at home in this frontier town. "Good morning," he said, his eyes taking in her appearance. "Did you sleep well?" "Well enough," Lucy replied. "And you?" "Fine." He gestured toward the stairs. "I thought we might have breakfast before visiting the telegraph office. The hotel dining room serves until 9. "That sounds wonderful," Lucy said, "though I should tell you that Mrs. Thornton has kindly offered to press my dress while we eat." Wade nodded approvingly. "Clara Thornton's a good woman. Her husband Jacob runs the hotel, but she's the heart of the place." They descended to the dining room, where the aroma of coffee and frying bacon filled the air. Several tables were occupied, primarily by men who glanced up with interest as Lucy entered with Wade. A plump, pleasant-faced woman approached them immediately. "Wade Wilson, as I live and breathe," she said warmly. "Back in town early this year." "Mrs. Thornton," Wade said with genuine affection. "Good to see you. This is Miss Lucy Sinclair." "Miss Sinclair, welcome to Shafter," Clara Thornton said, her keen eyes taking in Lucy's situation with a single glance. "Sarah mentioned you've been traveling. If you'd like to leave your dress for pressing after breakfast, I'd be happy to take care of it." "That's very kind of you," Lucy said gratefully. "Not at all, dear. We look after our own here." Mrs. Thornton led them to a table by the window. "Now, what can I bring you for breakfast?" "The hot cakes are particularly good this morning." After ordering, Lucy found herself studying the other diners, curious about the people who called this frontier town home. There were obvious differences from Philadelphia society: men in work clothes rather than suits, women dressed practically rather than fashionably. Conversations centered on cattle prices and crop yields rather than social events and politics. Yet there was also a sense of community that reminded her of home: the way Mrs. Thornton greeted each customer by name, the comfortable banter between the sheriff and the blacksmith at a nearby table, the obvious concern when an elderly man mentioned his wife was feeling poorly. "What are you thinking?" Wade asked, noticing her observation of the room. Lucy smiled. "That Shafter is very different from Philadelphia, yet people are essentially the same everywhere." Wade nodded, a glimmer of approval in his eyes. "Most travelers only see the differences. Takes wisdom to see the similarities." Their breakfast arrived: generous portions of hot cakes, bacon, and eggs, with strong coffee to wash it all down. Lucy ate with genuine appetite, realizing how much she had missed proper meals during their journey. "After we send the telegraph," Wade said between bites, "we should see about getting you settled at Mrs. Hollister's boarding house. Then perhaps visit the general store for whatever supplies you need." Lucy nodded, then hesitated. "Wade, what happens after that?" He met her gaze across the table. "That depends on what you want to happen." "I'm not sure what you mean," Lucy said, though her heart had begun to beat faster. Wade set down his fork, his expression serious. "You have options, Lucy. We can try to arrange transport to Oregon to rejoin your mother and brother. The Foster train won't reach Portland for weeks yet, so there's time to catch up to them. Or," Lucy prompted when he paused, "or you could stay in Shafter until spring." Wade's eyes held hers. "Send word to your mother that you're safe but staying here for the winter. The mountain passes will be snowed in soon anyway, making travel west difficult." "Stay here," Lucy repeated, the possibility both frightening and strangely appealing. "What would I do in Shafter for an entire winter?" "Work if you wanted to, Mrs. Thornton mentioned yesterday that she's looking for help with the hotel accounts. Or the school teacher always needs an assistant." Wade shrugged. "A woman with your education would find opportunities." Lucy considered the suggestion. Staying in Shafter hadn't occurred to her. She had been so focused on reaching Oregon, on reuniting with her mother and brother. Yet the thought of remaining here, of carving out her own path rather than following her mother's, held an unexpected appeal. And there was Wade. If she stayed in Shafter, perhaps there would be time to explore the connection that had formed between them during their journey. "I'll think about it," she said finally. "First, I need to let Mother know I'm alive. She must be frantic." After breakfast, Lucy changed into her freshly pressed dress, marveling at the difference a clean, unwrinkled garment made to her morale. She met Wade in the hotel lobby, and together they walked to the telegraph office, a small building near the center of town. The telegrapher, a thin man with spectacles perched on his nose, listened to their story with professional interest. "Fort Laramie can relay a message to the Foster train when it passes through," he confirmed. "What would you like to send, Miss Sinclair?" Lucy considered carefully, then dictated. "To Mrs. Alina Sinclair, Foster Wagon train. Am safe in Shafter, Wyoming. Fell ill, was left behind. Rescued by Scout Wade Wilson. Will remain in Shafter until spring. Please continue to Oregon as planned. Will join you when passes clear. All my love, Lucy." The telegrapher counted the words, named his fee, and promised the message would be sent immediately. "Fort Laramie usually replies within the day if they've received clearly," he added. "You can check back this afternoon." Outside the telegraph office, Wade looked at Lucy with surprise. "You've decided to stay in Shafter for the winter." Lucy nodded, suddenly certain of her decision. "It seems the most practical choice. The journey to Oregon would be difficult and expensive to arrange, and as you said, the mountain passes will soon be impassable." She met his gaze. "Besides, I find I'm not ready to leave just yet." Something flickered in Wade's blue eyes, hope perhaps, or relief. "Mrs. Hollister will be pleased to have a long-term boarder," he said, his tone neutral despite the emotion she had glimpsed. "Shall we go meet her?" The Hollister boarding house was a neat two-story structure at the quieter end of town, surrounded by a small garden that still showed the remains of summer flowers. Elizabeth Hollister herself proved to be a brisk, efficient widow in her 50s, with shrewd eyes that assessed Lucy thoroughly before pronouncing her a respectable young lady, unlike some who pass through Shafter. "I have the front bedroom available, Mrs. Hollister informed them as she led Lucy and Wade up the stairs. "Best in the house, with its own washstand and a view of the garden." She opened a door to reveal a pleasant room furnished with a brass bed, a small desk, a wardrobe, and the promised washstand. Crisp white curtains framed a window that indeed overlooked the garden. "It's lovely," Lucy said sincerely. "Breakfast and dinner included in your board," Mrs. Hollister continued. "Laundry extra but reasonable. No gentlemen callers in bedrooms, of course." She glanced meaningfully at Wade. "Parlor available for receiving visitors until 9 o'clock evenings." "Of course," Lucy agreed, flushing slightly at the implication. "Well then," Mrs. Hollister said, apparently satisfied. "When will you be moving in, Miss Sinclair?" "Today, if convenient," Lucy replied. "Though I'm afraid I have very few belongings at present." "We'll remedy that," Wade said. "The general store has everything you'll need." After arranging for Lucy to return later with her trunk, they left the boarding house and walked toward the center of town. Lucy was struck by how comfortable Wade seemed in Shafter, nodding to people they passed, occasionally stopping for brief conversations. This was a different side of him than the solitary trail guide still reserved, but clearly respected and at ease in this community. "You have many friends here," she observed after he exchanged greetings with the blacksmith. Wade considered this. "Acquaintances, mostly, but yes, I know most people in town." He glanced at her. "Shafter's small enough that newcomers are noticed, but large enough that they're welcomed if they contribute." "And how do I contribute?" Lucy asked, half jesting. Wade's expression grew serious. "That's for you to decide. What are your skills, Lucy Sinclair? Besides telling stories that make a man forget he's sitting in a cave during a thunderstorm. Lucy laughed, surprised and pleased that he remembered her storytelling so fondly. I was educated at Miss Porter's School for Young Ladies in Philadelphia, she said. I can read and write fluently, speak passable French, keep accounts, play the piano adequately, and stitch a fine seam. She paused, then added with a self-deprecating smile, none of which seems particularly useful in Wyoming. You'd be surprised, Wade replied. Reading, writing, and arithmetic are valuable anywhere, and Shafter has a small school that's always short of qualified teachers. I've never taught, Lucy admitted. But you could, Wade said with simple confidence that warmed her. You have a way of explaining things clearly. I noticed on the trail. They had reached the general store, a large building with a covered porch and windows displaying everything from tools to fabrics. Inside, the store was a treasure trove of goods, shelves stacked with canned foods and dry goods, barrels of flour and sugar, racks of ready-made clothing, tools hanging from the ceiling, and glass cases containing more delicate items. Mr. Wilson, the storekeeper greeted them. And this must be Miss Sinclair. Sheriff Mills mentioned you'd be coming by. He extended his hand. Howard Fletcher, my wife and I run the place. How do you do, Mr. Fletcher? Lucy said, shaking his hand. I find myself in need of quite a few items, having lost most of my belongings. Helen will help you with the ladies' necessities, Fletcher said, gesturing toward a pleasant-faced woman arranging fabrics at the back of the store. Just tell her what you need, and she'll set you right. For the next hour, Lucy selected the essentials for her extended stay in Shafter undergarments, stockings, a nightgown, a second dress for everyday wear, a shawl for the cooling autumn weather, toiletries and writing materials to correspond with her mother. Wade discreetly busied himself examining tools while she and Mrs. Fletcher discussed feminine requirements. When they finally approached the counter with her selections, Lucy reached for the reticule containing her meager funds, only to find Wade already placing money on the counter. Wade, no, she protested. I can pay for my own things. Consider it an advance, he said quietly. Sheriff Mills mentioned the school needs a temporary teacher while Miss Abernathy recovers from her broken ankle. If you're interested, the position pays $30 a month plus a small cottage behind the schoolhouse. Lucy stared at him in surprise. You arranged a position for me, without asking, Wade shook his head. I merely inquired about possibilities. The decision is yours. But the school board meets tonight, and if you're interested, I could introduce you to them. Lucy felt a rush of conflicting emotions: gratitude for his thoughtfulness, irritation at his presumption, and excitement at the prospect of useful employment. I would like to meet them, she said after a moment. Though I make no promises about accepting the position. Wade nodded, a hint of a smile touching his lips. Fair enough. They left the store with Lucy's purchases wrapped in brown paper packages, Wade insisting on carrying the larger bundles despite her protests. As they walked toward the hotel to collect her trunk, Lucy found herself studying the town with new eyes, not as a temporary stopping place, but as her home for the coming winter. The buildings that had seemed rudimentary compared to Philadelphia now appeared sturdy and practical. The unpaved streets that had initially struck her as primitive now seemed merely unfinished, part of a town still finding its identity. The people, with their direct gazes and forthright manners, no longer seemed foreign but refreshingly honest. You're smiling, Wade observed as they walked. Something amusing, not amusing, Lucy replied. Just realizing that I might actually enjoy living in Shafter for a while. Wade's expression softened. It grows on you, he admitted. I never intended to make it a regular stop, but somehow I kept coming back. Because of Miss Harrington?" Lucy asked before she could stop herself. Wade glanced at her sharply. "No, that came later and ended quickly." He was quiet for a moment, then added, "I come back because Shafter doesn't ask too many questions about a man's past. People here care more about what you can do now than what you did before." Lucy understood the appeal of that, especially for a man who carried the burdens Wade did. "A fresh start," she murmured. "Something like that," Wade agreed. They had reached the hotel. Lucy went upstairs to collect her few belongings while Wade arranged for the hotel bill to be sent to the sheriff's office, explaining that Lucy's situation would be included in his report about the Foster wagon train. With her trunk loaded onto a borrowed handcart, they made their way to Mrs. Hollister's boarding house. Wade carried the trunk up to Lucy's room while she arranged the final details with her landlady. "Thank you again," Lucy said as they stood on the boarding house porch afterward, "for everything." Wade nodded, suddenly seeming uncomfortable outside the context of their journey together. "The school board meets at 7 at the church. I'll come for you at 6:30 if that suits." "That would be perfect," Lucy agreed. "Until then." She watched as he walked away, his tall figure moving easily through the town he had come to call home. Something had shifted between them now that they had reached Shafter, the intensity of their shared journey giving way to the more complex realities of settled life. Yet Lucy found herself more drawn to him than ever, curious about the man Wade Wilson was here in town, beyond the capable guide who had saved her life on the prairie. That evening, Wade arrived punctually at Mrs. Hollister's, dressed in the cleanest version of his usual attire: dark trousers, a light blue shirt that brought out his eyes, and his familiar leather vest, now brushed free of trail dust. His hair was neatly combed, and he had clearly made an effort to present a respectable appearance. Lucy had done the same, wearing her best dress, a deep green that flattered her coloring, and arranging her hair in a simple but neat style. Mrs. Hollister had loaned her a woolen shawl against the evening chill. "You look nice," Wade said simply as she joined him on the porch. "Thank you," Lucy replied, pleased by the understated compliment. "So do you." They walked toward the church, Wade briefing her on the school situation as they went. "Miss Abernathy fell from a ladder while hanging decorations for the Harvest Festival last week," he explained. "Doctor says she needs at least 2 months to heal properly. Meanwhile, there are 28 children between 6 and 15 who need teaching." 28 children of all ages in one classroom?" Lucy asked, slightly alarmed. Wade nodded. "Welcome to frontier education. The older ones help the younger ones. System works well enough when there's a competent teacher." He glanced at her. "Which you would be." "Your confidence is flattering, if perhaps misplaced," Lucy said dryly. "I've never managed a classroom." "You managed to survive being abandoned on the prairie," Wade pointed out. "A few frontier children should be manageable by comparison." Lucy laughed. "When you put it that way, I suppose you're right." They reached the simple white church that served as Shafter's place of worship and community gathering space. Several horses and wagons were already tethered outside, indicating the school board had assembled. Inside, 5 men and 2 women were seated at a table at the front of the church. Lucy recognized Sheriff Mills among them, along with Mr. Fletcher from the general store. Wade led her forward, making introductions. "Miss Sinclair, this is our school board Sheriff Mills, whom you've met, Mr. Fletcher and his wife Helen from the store, Reverend Thomas, our minister, Dr. Pearson and his wife Mary, and Mr. Granger, who owns the lumber mill." Wade turned to the board. "Ladies and gentlemen, Miss Lucy Sinclair." Lucy greeted each member politely, trying to project confidence despite her nervousness. The board members studied her with frank curiosity. "Miss Sinclair, Wilson here tells us you're educated in the Eastern style and looking for temporary employment while wintering in Shafter," Sheriff Mills said, taking the lead. "We find ourselves in need of a teacher until Miss Abernathy recovers. Seems Providence might have brought you to us at just the right time." "I'm certainly interested in the position," Lucy replied carefully. "Though I should be honest, while I received an excellent education myself, I have no formal training as a teacher." "Can you read, write, cipher, and maintain order in a classroom?" Mrs. Fletcher asked practically. "Yes to the first three," Lucy said with a smile. "The fourth remains to be seen, but I believe I can." Miss Sinclair was on her way to Oregon to join family when circumstances left her stranded, Wade explained, omitting the more dramatic details of her abandonment. "She's decided to remain in Shafter until spring, when the mountain passes clear." "Where were you educated, Miss Sinclair, Doctor?" Pearson inquired. "Miss Porter's school in Philadelphia, sir. My father was a physician who believed in education for women as well as men." The doctor nodded approvingly. "A progressive view I share. My own daughters attended school in Boston." The questions continued for nearly half an hour, covering Lucy's background, her knowledge of various subjects, and her views on education and discipline. She answered honestly, occasionally glancing at Wade, who stood quietly at the back of the room, his presence reassuring. Finally, Reverend Thomas cleared his throat. "Well, Miss Sinclair, the board would like to discuss your application privately. Perhaps you and Mr. Wilson could wait outside for a few minutes." Lucy and Wade stepped out onto the church porch, the cool evening air a relief after the warmth inside. Stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky, and the sounds of piano music drifted from one of the saloons down the street. "You did well," Wade said, leaning against a porch post. "They were impressed." "How can you tell?" Lucy asked, genuinely curious. Wade's mouth quirked. "Mrs. Pearson was nodding whenever you spoke about literature. Mr. Granger stopped frowning after you demonstrated your arithmetic skills, and Sheriff Mills actually smiled twice." Lucy laughed softly. "You notice a great deal." "Habit," Wade said with a shrug. "Noticing details keeps you alive on the trail." Before Lucy could respond, the church door opened, and Reverend Thomas beckoned them inside. The board members were still seated at their table, expressions giving nothing away. "Miss Sinclair," Sheriff Mills said formally, "after consideration, the board would like to offer you the position of temporary teacher at Shafter School, effective immediately, at a salary of $30 per month, plus use of the teacher's cottage for the duration of your employment. The position is expected to last approximately 8 weeks, depending on Miss Abernathy's recovery." Lucy felt a rush of excitement mixed with trepidation. "I would be honored to accept," she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Excellent," Mrs. Pearson said, smiling warmly. "I'll show you the schoolhouse and cottage tomorrow morning if that's convenient. School has been suspended since Miss Abernathy's accident, but we could resume classes on Monday." "That would be perfect," Lucy agreed. "Thank you all for your trust in me." As they left the church, Lucy could barely contain her excitement. "I can't believe it," she said to Wade as they walked back toward Mrs. Hollister's. "A month ago, I was a proper Philadelphia lady on my way to Oregon with my mother. Now I'm to be a school teacher in Wyoming." Wade smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his usually serious face. "Life has a way of taking unexpected turns." "Indeed it does," Lucy agreed, thinking of how their paths had crossed her abandonment by the wagon train, his decision to turn back for her. Coincidence or fate, she couldn't say, but she was increasingly grateful for whatever had brought them together. At Mrs. Hollister's gate, they paused. The evening had grown chilly, and Lucy pulled her borrowed shawl closer around her shoulders. "Thank you for arranging this opportunity," she said softly. "You've been extraordinarily kind to me, Wade Wilson." Wade looked uncomfortable with the praise. "You earned the position on your own merits. I just made the introduction. Nevertheless, I'm grateful." Lucy hesitated, then asked the question that had been on her mind all day. "Will you be staying in Shafter for the winter?" Something flickered in Wade's eyes, uncertainty, perhaps, or hope. "I usually do," he said carefully. "Though I sometimes take short scouting jobs for the Army when they need someone who knows the territory." "I see," Lucy said, trying to hide her disappointment at the thought of him leaving, even temporarily. Wade seemed to struggle with something, then spoke again. "Lucy, he stopped, then started over. "Would you allow me to call on you, properly I mean, not just as the man who brought you to town?" Lucy's heart quickened at the formal request, so at odds with the intimate days they had spent together on the trail. "I would like that very much," she said simply. Relief and pleasure crossed Wade's face. "Good," he said. "That's good." He cleared his throat. "I'll come by tomorrow afternoon if that's acceptable, after you've seen the schoolhouse." "I'll look forward to it," Lucy replied, unable to suppress a smile. Wade tipped his hat, a gesture that seemed charmingly formal after the casual camaraderie of their journey. "Good night, Lucy." "Good night, Wade." She watched him walk away, his tall figure disappearing into the gathering darkness. Only when he was out of sight did Lucy enter the boarding house, where Mrs. Hollister was waiting with curious eyes and a cup of tea, eager to hear about the school board meeting, and Lucy suspected her relationship with the town's respected scout. The next morning dawned clear and cool, with the crispness of approaching autumn in the air. Lucy rose early, eager to see the schoolhouse that would be her domain for the next 2 months. She breakfasted with Mrs. Hollister, and the boarding house's only other current resident, a land surveyor named Mr. Peterson, who was passing through on government business. At precisely 9 o'clock, a knock at the door announced the arrival of Mary Pearson, the doctor's wife and school board member who had promised to show Lucy the school facilities. "Good morning, Miss Sinclair," Mrs. Pearson greeted her warmly. "Ready to see your new kingdom?" Lucy laughed at the description. "Indeed I am, Mrs. Pearson." They walked the short distance to the schoolhouse, which stood at the edge of town, a simple white clapboard building with a small bell tower. Behind it was a modest cottage, similarly constructed but with bright blue shutters that gave it a cheerful appearance. "The school was built 3 years ago," Mrs. Pearson explained as they approached. "Before that, classes were held in the church." She produced a key and unlocked the schoolhouse door. "We're quite proud of it. The whole town contributed to its construction." Inside, the schoolhouse consisted of one large room with rows of wooden desks facing a teacher's desk on a small raised platform. A blackboard covered most of the front wall, and a pot-bellied stove stood in the corner. Windows along both side walls provided ample light. "It's lovely," Lucy said sincerely. "Far better equipped than I expected." Mrs. Pearson beamed with pride. "We believe in education out here, Miss Sinclair. Our children may live on the frontier, but they needn't be ignorant." She showed Lucy the supply cabinet, stocked with chalk, slates, readers, and basic texts on arithmetic, history, and grammar. "Miss Abernathy left her lesson plans as well," Mrs. Pearson added, indicating a thick notebook on the teacher's desk. "Though you're welcome to adjust them as you see fit." Next, they visited the teacher's cottage, a snug dwelling consisting of a combined sitting room and kitchen, a small bedroom, and a tiny washroom. The furniture was simple but sturdy, and someone had placed a vase of late wildflowers on the kitchen table. Helen Fletcher brought those over this morning, Mrs. Pearson explained, noticing Lucy's attention to the flowers. Word travels fast in Shafter. It's perfect, Lucy said, genuinely pleased with the cottage. It was smaller than her childhood home in Philadelphia, of course, but it offered privacy and independence that she found immediately appealing. "When may I move in?" "Today, if you wish," Mrs. Pearson replied. "The linens are fresh, and the pantry has basic supplies. We normally provide coal for the stove and lamps as part of your compensation." They spent the next hour discussing practical matters, the schedule of classes, the range of abilities among the students, the expectations of parents and the school board. Lucy took careful notes, increasingly excited about the challenge ahead. "One last thing, Mrs. Pearson said as they were finishing their tour. "The children are a good sort overall, but they'll test you at first. It's their way of taking your measure. Stand firm, be fair, and they'll respect you for it." "Thank you for the advice," Lucy said, appreciating the older woman's frankness. "I'll remember that." After Mrs. Pearson departed, Lucy remained at the cottage, exploring what would be her home for the coming weeks. It was humble compared to her family's home in Philadelphia, but it offered a freedom she had never experienced, a place that was hers alone, where she could make her own decisions without consulting anyone else's preferences. She was contemplating where her few belongings would best fit when a knock came at the door. Opening it, she found Wade standing on the small porch, a wooden crate in his arms. "Morning," he said. "Thought you might need a few things for the cottage." Lucy stepped back to let him enter. "How thoughtful. Please come in." Wade set the crate on the kitchen table and began unpacking it: a tin of coffee, a small bag of sugar, salt, flour, a loaf of fresh bread, a crock of butter, a jar of preserves, and several other basic foodstuffs. At the bottom was a small potted plant with tiny white flowers. "Practical items from me," he explained. "The plant is from Mrs. Fletcher, said every home needs something living and growing." Lucy was touched by the thoughtfulness of these virtual strangers. "Everyone has been so kind," she said, arranging the supplies in the small pantry cupboard. "I wasn't expecting such a welcome." "Shafter takes care of its own," Wade said simply, "and they're genuinely pleased to have found a teacher. Children have been running wild since Miss Abernathy's accident." Lucy smiled at the image. "Well, their holiday ends Monday." She placed the plant on the windowsill where it would catch the morning sun. "Have you had breakfast? I could make coffee now that I have some." "Already ate," Wade said, "but coffee sounds good." Lucy busied herself with the stove, grateful that Mrs. Hollister had insisted on teaching her how to operate one properly the previous evening. Soon, the kitchen was filled with the aroma of brewing coffee. "What do you think of the cottage?" Wade asked, seating himself at the small table. "It's perfect," Lucy replied honestly. "Small, but all I need. And I'll have my privacy, which would be harder at Mrs. Hollister's in the long term." Wade nodded, understanding. "Planning to move in today?" "Yes, this afternoon. Mrs. Hollister has already adjusted my bill." Lucy poured coffee into the 2 mugs that had been left in the cupboard. "I'm nervous about Monday, though. 28 children of all different ages and abilities seems rather daunting." "You'll manage," Wade said with that simple confidence she found so reassuring. "Besides, not all 28 come every day. Some of the older boys will be helping with harvest on the nearby farms." Lucy brought the coffee to the table and sat across from him. "I hope you're right. I'd hate to disappoint the school board after they took a chance on me." "You won't," Wade said firmly. He sipped his coffee, then set the mug down. "I spoke with Sheriff Mills this morning. He heard back from Fort Laramie. Your telegram was received and will be delivered to the Foster train when it passes through." Relief washed over Lucy. "Oh, thank goodness." Mother must be beside herself with worry. Foster will have some explaining to do when she learns he reported you dead, Wade observed, a hardness entering his voice. I almost feel sorry for him, Lucy said, surprising herself. Almost, but not quite. They sat in companionable silence for a moment, drinking their coffee. Lucy found herself studying Wade's face in the morning light streaming through the window. There was a steadiness to his features that she found increasingly attractive, the clear blue eyes that missed nothing, the firm mouth that rarely smiled but spoke honest words, the strong line of his jaw that suggested determination. "What?" he asked, catching her gaze. Lucy felt herself blush. "I was just thinking how strange it is that we met less than a week ago. It feels like I've known you much longer." Something softened in Wade's expression. "Shared danger has that effect," he said. "Shows a person's true character quickly." "Is that why you came back for me?" Lucy asked. "You saw something in my character worth saving." Wade set down his coffee cup, his expression turning serious. "I came back because it was the right thing to do. I stayed because I found someone worth knowing." The simple honesty of his words touched Lucy deeply. "I'm glad you did," she said softly. "Stay, I mean." They looked at each other across the small table, something unspoken yet powerful passing between them. Wade opened his mouth as if to say more, but a knock at the door interrupted the moment. Lucy rose to answer it, finding Thomas Garrett on her doorstep, his arm still in a sling but his smile as charming as ever. "Miss Sinclair," he said cheerfully, "I heard you were moving into the teacher's cottage today and thought I'd offer my services. My brother can spare me for the afternoon to help with the heavy lifting." Before Lucy could respond, Wade appeared at her shoulder. "Morning, Garrett," he said, his tone neutral but his posture suddenly more rigid. Thomas's smile dimmed slightly. "Wilson, didn't realize you were here." An awkward silence fell, the two men regarding each other with barely concealed wariness. Lucy cleared her throat. "How kind of you to offer, Mr. Garrett, but I'm afraid I have very little to move, just my trunk and a few packages from the general store." "Mr. Wilson has already volunteered to assist me." Thomas nodded, his expression clearing. "Of course. Another time, perhaps. My brother's invited several neighbors for dinner on Sunday after church. We'd be honored if you'd join us, Miss Sinclair. You too, Wilson, if you're not otherwise engaged." Lucy glanced at Wade, uncertain how to respond. His face gave nothing away, but she sensed his reluctance. "That's very kind," she said carefully. "Let me settle into my new position first, and perhaps I can join you another time." Thomas accepted this gracefully, tipped his hat, and departed, leaving Lucy and Wade alone once more. "You didn't have to decline on my account," Wade said after the young man had gone. Lucy turned to face him. "I declined because I genuinely want to focus on preparing for my first day of teaching." She hesitated, then added more softly, "And because I sensed you and Mr. Garrett have unresolved issues that might make for an uncomfortable dinner." Wade's mouth quirked in that almost smile she was coming to recognize. "Perceptive of you. It doesn't take much perception to see that you distrust him," Lucy observed, returning to her seat at the table. "May I ask why?" Wade was silent for a long moment, clearly debating how much to share. Finally, he sighed. Garrett wasn't entirely truthful about his shoulder injury. The dislocation was real enough, but a man doesn't get rope burns on his wrists from falling off a horse. He met her gaze directly. "Someone tied him up, and not too long before we found him. He escaped somehow, but he's running from something or someone." Lucy felt a chill at this revelation. "Should we be concerned? Should Sheriff Mills know?" "Mills already knows," Wade assured her. "He's making inquiries. Meanwhile, we keep our distance from Garrett until we know more." He rose from the table. "I should go. Have some business at the livery stable to attend to. Shall I come back around 2 to help you move your things?" Lucy nodded, trying to process this new information about Thomas Garrett. "Yes, thank you. I'll be ready then." At the door, Wade paused. "Lucy," he said, his voice gentler than she had ever heard it, "don't worry about Garrett. Shafter's a safe town and you'll be fine at the cottage. Just be cautious as you would with any stranger." "I will," she promised. "Thank you for telling me." After Wade left, Lucy sat for a long time at the kitchen table, thinking about the complexities of her new life in Shafter. A week ago, her greatest concern had been surviving a fever in a wagon train. Now she was preparing to teach school, establishing her own household, and navigating the subtle currents of small-town relationships. And then there was Wade, the quiet, honorable man who had saved her life, and was now becoming something more than a rescuer or friend. His request to call on her properly suggested he felt the same connection she did, yet neither of them had put their feelings into words. With a sigh, Lucy rose and began making a list of what she would need for her first day of teaching. Whatever was developing between her and Wade Wilson would unfold in its own time. Meanwhile, she had 28 frontier children to prepare for, and that required all her attention. The weekend passed in a flurry of activity as Lucy settled into the teacher's cottage and prepared for her first day of classes. Wade helped her move her few belongings from Mrs. Hollister's and assisted in rearranging the cottage furniture to her liking. His visits became a regular part of her days, sometimes brief check-ins to ensure she had everything she needed, other times longer conversations over coffee or meals she prepared in her small kitchen. On Sunday, Lucy attended services at the church, where Reverend Thomas formally introduced her to the congregation as Shafter's temporary teacher. She met many of her future students and their parents, who welcomed her with varying degrees of curiosity and warmth. Wade sat beside her during the service, his presence drawing speculative glances from several townspeople. Lucy was conscious of the silent messages being exchanged, the unmarried Eastern lady and the solitary scout, sitting together in church, was noteworthy in a small community where little went unobserved. After the service, Lucy spent the remainder of Sunday reviewing Miss Abernathy's lesson plans and preparing for her first day of teaching. Wade stopped by in the evening with a small gift, a brass bell for her desk. "Every teacher needs a way to call the class to order," he said, placing it on the table between them. "This one came all the way from St. Louis on the last supply wagon." Lucy was touched by the thoughtful present. "It's perfect, Wade, thank you." He stayed for supper, a simple meal of bean soup and cornbread that Lucy had prepared, proud of her growing domestic skills. As they ate, she confessed her nervousness about the following day. "What if the children don't respect me? What if I can't maintain order or answer their questions?" Wade listened patiently to her concerns. "The first day is always the hardest," he said when she had finished, "but you'll find your way. Just be yourself, the woman who survived being abandoned on the prairie and walked 40 miles to safety." Lucy smiled at his characterization. "When you put it that way, I sound quite formidable." "You are," Wade said simply. "More than you know." His quiet confidence bolstered her courage, and by the time he left that evening, Lucy felt more prepared to face her new challenge. Monday morning dawned clear and cool. Lucy rose early, dressed in her best dress, and arranged her hair in a neat, professional style. After a quick breakfast, she walked to the schoolhouse, arriving well before the appointed hour of 8 o'clock. She arranged her desk, placed the new bell prominently at its corner, and wrote her name on the blackboard, "Miss Sinclair." Then she stood at the schoolhouse door, waiting to greet her students as they arrived. They came in twos and threes, children from town walking together, farm children arriving on horseback or in wagons driven by parents. Lucy welcomed each one, trying to commit names to memory as they filed past her into the classroom. At precisely 8 o'clock, she rang her bell and called the class to order. 24 students of varying ages looked back at her with expressions ranging from curiosity to wariness to outright mischief. "Good morning," Lucy said, projecting confidence she didn't entirely feel. "I am Miss Sinclair, and I will be your teacher while Miss Abernathy recovers. I'm looking forward to getting to know each of you and continuing the excellent work you've been doing under her guidance." A hand shot up in the back, row a boy of about 14 with a shock of red hair and a face full of freckles. "Miss Sinclair, is it true you were left behind by a wagon train and had to walk all the way to Shafter?" Lucy blinked, surprised by the direct question and the rapid spread of her story. "Not exactly, Matthew," she said, recalling his name from the introductions. "I was separated from my wagon train due to illness, and Mr. Wilson helped me reach Shafter safely." "Pa says Mr. Wilson is sweet on you," piped up a small girl in the front row, causing several older students to giggle. Lucy felt heat rise to her cheeks, but maintained her composure. "What Mr. Wilson is, Abigail, is a kind and honorable man who helps people in need. Now, shall we begin our lessons, or would you prefer to discuss the town's gossip all morning?" This gentle rebuke, delivered with a smile, earned her approving nods from the older students and subdued the younger ones. Lucy proceeded with the day's lessons, following Miss Abernathy's well-organized plans while adding her own touches where appropriate. By midday recess, she had established a rhythm with the class and felt more confident in her role. The younger children were eager to please, while the older ones, after testing her knowledge with increasingly difficult questions, seemed to accept her authority with reasonable grace. As the children played in the schoolyard during their noon break, Lucy stood watching them, feeling an unexpected satisfaction. Teaching was challenging but rewarding in ways she hadn't anticipated. Each small breakthrough, a struggling child finally grasping a concept, a reluctant reader completing a passage, even a misbehaving student responding to correction, brought its own sense of accomplishment. She was so absorbed in her observations that she didn't notice Wade approaching until he was beside her. "How's it going?" he asked, his voice warm with concern and curiosity. Lucy turned to him with a smile. "Better than I expected. They tested me as Mrs. Pearson warned they would, but I think we've reached an understanding." Wade nodded, watching the children at play. "They're good kids mostly, just spirited." "Indeed they are," Lucy agreed. "Though I'm not sure how I feel about the entire town discussing whether or not you're sweet on me." Wade's eyebrows rose, and to Lucy's surprise, a faint flush colored his tan cheeks. "Small towns," he said with a sigh. "Nothing stays private for long." "Apparently not," Lucy replied, finding his discomfort endearing. "Abigail Martin informed the entire class that her father says you have feelings for me." Wade was quiet for a moment, his eyes still on the playing children. Then he turned to face her directly. "Would it bother you if he was right?" Lucy's heart quickened at the directness of the question. "No," she said honestly. "It wouldn't bother me at all." Something softened in Wade's expression, relief perhaps, or hope. "Good," he said simply, "because he is." Before Lucy could respond to this quiet declaration, the school bell rang, signaling the end of recess. Children began streaming back toward the schoolhouse, their voices raised in final exclamations of their games. "I should go," Wade said, stepping back. "Will you have dinner with me tonight? At the hotel, a proper dinner, not just trail rations or cottage soup." "I'd like that very much," Lucy replied, warmth spreading through her at the invitation. "I'll come for you at 6, Wade said, touching the brim of his hat in farewell before walking away. Lucy watched him go, aware of the curious eyes of her students observing this exchange. With a smile she couldn't quite suppress, she turned and followed the children into the schoolhouse for the afternoon session. The remainder of the day passed quickly, with Lucy growing more comfortable in her role as teacher with each hour. By dismissal time, she felt she had made a promising start, though she knew there would be many challenges ahead as she adjusted to the varying needs and abilities of her students. After the last child had departed, Lucy remained at the schoolhouse, organizing her notes and preparing for the next day's lessons. As she worked, her mind kept returning to Wade's quiet declaration, "Because he is," and the dinner invitation that followed. It seemed they were moving toward something deeper than friendship, and the prospect both excited and intimidated her. At precisely 6 o'clock, a knock at the cottage door announced Wade's arrival. Lucy had changed from her teaching dress into her best gown, the deep green one that brought out the amber highlights in her brown eyes. She had arranged her hair more elaborately than usual, with soft curls framing her face. When she opened the door, she was rewarded by the appreciation in Wade's eyes as he took in her appearance. He had made an effort as well, wearing a clean white shirt under a dark vest she hadn't seen before, his usual trail clothes replaced by what were clearly his town clothes. "You look beautiful," he said simply. "Thank you," Lucy replied, pleased by the compliment. "You look very handsome yourself." Wade offered his arm, and they walked toward the hotel in the gathering dusk. The air was cool and crisp, carrying the scent of wood smoke from nearby chimneys. Stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky, and lamps glowed in windows along the street. "How was the rest of your first day?" Wade asked as they walked. Lucy described the afternoon's lessons, the challenges presented by teaching such a diverse group, and her plans for the days ahead. Wade listened attentively, asking questions that showed genuine interest in her work. "You sound like you found your calling," he observed as they approached the hotel. Lucy considered this. "Perhaps I have, at least for now. There's something deeply satisfying about teaching, seeing understanding dawn in a child's eyes, knowing you've helped them take one more step toward becoming who they're meant to be." Wade nodded, understanding in his expression. "That's how I feel about guiding. Not just showing the way, but helping people reach somewhere they couldn't get to on their own." It was a connection Lucy hadn't considered before that their work, though vastly different in context, shared a similar purpose. The insight created another bond between them, another level of understanding. The hotel dining room was busy but not crowded, with several tables occupied by local residents and a few travelers passing through town. Mrs. Thornton greeted them warmly and showed them to a table by the window, slightly removed from the others. "Best table in the house," she said with a meaningful glance between them, "for our new school teacher and her gallant rescuer." Lucy suppressed a smile at this transparent matchmaking. "Thank you, Mrs. Thornton. How is Mr. Thornton this evening?" "Busy in the kitchen, making his famous beef stew," the older woman replied. "I've already told him to send you two the best portions." After she departed to fetch their drinks, Wade shook his head ruefully. "I apologize for the gossip. It's the price of small-town living." "I don't mind," Lucy assured him. "Everyone has been kind, if a bit too interested in our relationship." "And what would you call our relationship, Miss Sinclair?" Wade asked, a rare teasing note in his voice. Lucy met his gaze across the table. "Evolving," she said thoughtfully. "From rescuer and rescued to friends, and now perhaps to something more." Wade nodded slowly. "Something more," he repeated. "I like the sound of that." Their dinner was indeed delicious rich beef stew with fresh baked bread, followed by apple pie that Mrs. Thornton insisted was on the house for our favorite couple. Throughout the meal, they talked easily, sharing stories and observations. Lucy told Wade more about her childhood in Philadelphia, her father's progressive views on women's education, and her mother's more traditional expectations. "Father always said I should develop my mind before considering marriage," she explained. "Mother worried I would become a spinster if I didn't focus more on social accomplishments." "And what did you want?" Wade asked. Lucy considered the question. "Both, I suppose. I wanted the education my father encouraged, but I also wanted a family of my own someday. Just not with the sort of men Mother kept introducing me to, wealthy businessmen and professionals who wanted a decorative wife to advance their social standing." Wade nodded, understanding. "And now? What do you want now?" The directness of his question caught Lucy off guard. She looked at him across the table, this quiet, honorable man who had entered her life so unexpectedly. "Now I want to discover who I am apart from my family's expectations," she said slowly. "I want to teach these children and do it well. I want to experience this different life, so far from everything I've known." She paused, then added softly, "And I want to explore what's developing between us, Wade Wilson, without rushing or presuming." Wade's expression softened, appreciation for her honesty evident in his eyes. "That seems wise," he said. "We have time." As they finished their meal and prepared to leave, Lucy noticed Victoria Harrington watching them from across the dining room. The banker's daughter was again elegantly dressed, her expression unreadable as she observed Wade helping Lucy with her shawl. Outside, the night had grown cooler, and Lucy drew her shawl more closely around her shoulders as they began the walk back to her cottage. Wade offered his arm again, and she took it, grateful for his warmth and solid presence beside her. "Victoria Harrington was watching us," Lucy observed as they walked. "She doesn't appear to have entirely reconciled herself to your disinterest." Wade glanced down at her, surprise in his expression. "I hadn't noticed," he said honestly. "And Victoria reconciled herself to my unsuitability long ago, when she realized I had no intention of giving up my scouting work to become a respectable businessman." "Her loss," Lucy said simply. Wade's arm tightened slightly against hers. "My gain," he replied, the words quiet but heartfelt. They walked in companionable silence for a while, the star-filled sky arching above them, the sounds of the town growing fainter as they approached the schoolhouse and cottage on its outskirts. When they reached Lucy's door, Wade stopped, turning to face her in the moonlight. "Thank you for dinner," Lucy said, suddenly shy despite the ease of their evening together. "My pleasure," Wade replied. He hesitated, then continued, "Lucy, I want to be clear about something. My feelings for you are genuine, but I understand that your life is in transition. You have your teaching position here for now, but come spring, you may want to continue to Oregon as planned." Lucy appreciated his honesty. "I don't know what spring will bring," she admitted. "A few months ago, I couldn't have imagined being here at all. But I do know that what's growing between us matters to me, Wade, very much." Wade nodded, his expression serious but warm. "To me as well," he said simply. He leaned forward slowly, giving her time to draw back if she wished. Lucy remained still, her heart quickening as Wade's lips met hers in a gentle, questioning kiss. It was brief but tender, a promise rather than a demand. When he pulled away, Lucy saw vulnerability in his eyes that he rarely allowed to show a question, a hope, a fear of rejection. She reached up and touched his cheek gently. "Good night, Wade," she said softly. "Good night, Lucy," he replied, his voice rougher than usual. "May I see you tomorrow?" "I'd like that," she said. Perhaps you could come for supper after school. I make a passable chicken and dumplings." Wade smiled, the expression transforming his face. "I'll look forward to it." With that, he waited until she was safely inside before departing, his footsteps fading into the night. Lucy leaned against the closed door, her fingers touching her lips where his had been moments before, a smile she couldn't suppress spreading across her face. The weeks that followed established a pattern to Lucy's life in Shafter. Her days were filled with teaching, a challenge she found increasingly rewarding as she developed her own methods and connected with her students. Evenings often included Wade's company, sometimes for meals she prepared at the cottage, other times for walks around town or occasional dinners at the hotel. Word arrived from Fort Laramie that Lucy's message had been delivered to the Foster wagon train. A return telegram from her mother expressed profound relief at learning Lucy was alive and understanding of her decision to remain in Shafter until spring. Eleanor Sinclair reported that she and Lucy's brother were well and would wait for her in Oregon, where they had been welcomed by her uncle's family. This news brought Lucy both relief and a sense of independence she had never experienced before. For the first time in her life, she was making her own decisions, supporting herself through her work, and building relationships based on who she truly was rather than her family's expectations or social standing. Her relationship with Wade deepened gradually, built on conversation, shared experiences, and growing trust. He told her more about his past, his Ohio childhood, his brief service in the Union Cavalry, the years after the war when he had drifted westward seeking purpose. Lucy shared her own stories, her close relationship with her father, her mother's social ambitions, her private dreams of a life that balanced intellectual pursuits with love and family. Their courtship, for that was what it had become, proceeded under the watchful, but generally approving eyes of Shafter's residents. Wade began calling at the cottage regularly, often bringing small gifts, a book he thought she would enjoy, wildflowers gathered during his rides outside town, once a kitten he'd rescued from the livery stable, which promptly made itself at home in the cottage and became Lucy's devoted companion. October gave way to November, bringing colder weather and the first hints of the harsh Wyoming winter to come. Lucy's students progressed in their studies, and she found herself genuinely attached to many of them. The parents expressed satisfaction with her teaching, and several approached her about continuing beyond Miss Abernathy's recovery, suggesting they might need an assistant teacher permanently. Meanwhile, Sheriff Mills had made inquiries about Thomas Garrett, discovering that he was indeed running from something not the law, as they had initially suspected, but a vengeful rancher whose daughter Thomas had become involved with against her father's wishes. The situation had apparently been resolved when the young woman chose another suitor, but Thomas had decided to remain in Shafter, working at his brother's ranch and occasionally tipping his hat to Lucy when their paths crossed in town. As Thanksgiving approached, Shafter prepared for its annual community celebration. The entire town would gather at the church for a shared meal, with each family contributing dishes to the feast. Lucy found herself included in these preparations as naturally as if she had lived there for years rather than weeks. The evening before Thanksgiving, Wade came to the cottage with news. "Sheriff Mills just received word from Fort Laramie," he said as they sat by the fire, the kitten which Lucy had named Scout in honor of Wade purring on her lap. "The Foster train reached Oregon safely. Your mother and brother are settled with your uncle's family near Portland." Lucy felt a complex mixture of emotions: relief that her family was safe, gratitude that they had reached their destination, but also a strange sense of distance. Oregon seemed farther away than ever, not just in miles but in terms of her life's direction. "I'm glad they arrived safely," she said. "I should write to Mother soon, let her know how I'm faring." Wade studied her face in the firelight. "Do you regret staying behind?" Lucy considered the question seriously. "No," she said finally. "I miss Mother and Daniel, of course, but this time in Shafter has been transformative. I've discovered strengths I didn't know I had, abilities I might never have developed if I'd continued to Oregon. And professional success," Wade added, gesturing to the stack of student compositions she had been reviewing earlier. "You're a natural teacher, Lucy." She smiled at his praise. "I enjoy it more than I ever expected. These children have taught me as much as I've taught them." They sat in companionable silence for a while, the fire crackling in the small stove, Scouts purring the only other sound in the cozy room. Outside, the first snowflakes of the season had begun to fall, dusting the windowsill with white. "Lucy," Wade said finally, breaking the silence, "there's something I've been wanting to ask you." Something in his tone made her heart quicken. She set Scout gently on the floor and turned to face Wade more directly. "Yes." Wade reached for her hand, his larger one enveloping hers with gentle strength. "These past weeks have been the happiest of my life," he said, his voice steady but soft. "I never expected to find someone like you, especially not in such unlikely circumstances." "Nor I you," Lucy replied, her throat suddenly tight with emotion. Wade took a deep breath. "I know it hasn't been long, and I understand if you think this is premature. But the winter's coming, and with it, decisions about the future." His blue eyes held hers steadily. "I love you, Lucy Sinclair. I think I began falling in love with you that first day on the trail when you insisted on walking despite your weakness. Your courage, your intelligence, your kindness, everything about you has captured my heart." Lucy felt tears spring to her eyes at this declaration, so simple yet so profound. "Oh, Wade," she whispered. He squeezed her hand gently. "I'm not asking for an answer tonight. Just for you to consider a future where we face whatever comes together, not just until spring, but beyond. I know you have your teaching, your family waiting in Oregon. I know there are many factors to consider, but whatever you decide, I wanted you to know the truth of my feelings." Lucy looked at the man before her, this quiet, honorable soul who had saved her life and then, day by day, had shown her what true partnership could be. The answer came to her heart with absolute clarity. "I love you too, Wade," she said simply. "I think I have for some time now. And yes, there are complications and considerations, but my heart is certain, even if the details remain to be worked out." The joy that transformed Wade's face was like sunrise breaking across the prairie. He raised her hand to his lips, kissing it reverently. "That's enough for now," he said. "We have time to figure out the rest." Lucy smiled through her tears. "We'll go together," she said softly, echoing his words from that first day, words that had given her hope when all seemed lost. "Whatever comes next, we'll face it together." Wade nodded, emotion making his voice rough. "Together," he agreed. Outside, the snow fell more heavily, blanketing Shafter in pristine white. But inside the teacher's cottage, warmth and love created a sanctuary against the gathering winter. As Wade drew her gently into his arms, Lucy knew with absolute certainty that she had found her true home not in Philadelphia or Oregon, but here in this frontier town, with this remarkable man who had turned back for her when everyone else had gone ahead. Thanksgiving Day dawned clear and cold, the newly fallen snow glittering in the morning sunlight. Lucy rose early, preparing her contribution to the community feast, an apple pie made from her mother's recipe, which she had finally mastered in her small cottage kitchen. As she worked, her mind kept returning to the previous evening and Wade's declaration of love. They had parted with a tender kiss and a promise to speak further after the Thanksgiving celebration. Lucy had slept poorly, not from doubt but from a combination of excitement and the weight of decisions to be made. She loved Wade, of that she had no doubt. But loving him meant reconciling her future with his, finding a way to honor her obligations to her family while building a life with him. It wouldn't be simple, but she was increasingly confident they could find a path forward together. At noon, Lucy walked to the church, her pie carefully balanced in her hands, the snow crunching beneath her boots. The church was transformed for the occasion, long tables replacing the usual pews, decorations of dried corn and autumn leaves adorning the walls, the wood stove radiating welcome heat against the November chill. Wade was waiting outside, handsome in his best clothes, his face lighting up when he saw her approach. He took the pie from her hands and offered his arm. "Happy Thanksgiving, Lucy," he said, his voice warm with affection. "Happy Thanksgiving, Wade," she replied, smiling up at him. Inside, the church was already filling with Shafter's residents, everyone bringing dishes to add to the communal tables. Lucy was greeted warmly by her students and their parents, by shopkeepers and ranchers, by the doctor and his wife, the Thorntons from the hotel, and many others who had become part of her life in the past weeks. "Miss Sinclair, Mr. Wilson, Mrs. Fletcher called, waving them over to where she stood with her husband near the front of the church. "We've saved seats for you at our table." The celebration began with a prayer of thanksgiving led by Reverend Thomas, followed by a communal meal that showcased the bounty of the region: roasted venison and turkey, potatoes and squash, corn bread and preserves, and more pies than Lucy could count. The conversation flowed easily, punctuated by laughter and the occasional raised voice as stories were shared across tables. Lucy found herself seated between Wade and Mrs. Pearson, with the Fletchers, Sheriff Mills, and several other town leaders completing their table. The conversation touched on many topics: the recent election results back east, the railroad's steady progress westward, local concerns about the upcoming winter, and hopes for spring planting. "Miss Sinclair," Mrs. Fletcher said during a lull in the conversation, "the school board is most impressed with your work these past weeks. Miss Abernathy's recovery is proceeding well, but she's indicated she might prefer a less demanding schedule when she returns." Lucy set down her fork, intrigued. "Oh." Mr. Fletcher nodded. "We're considering dividing the teaching duties, perhaps Miss Abernathy taking the younger children in the mornings, while you would teach the older students in the afternoons. It would mean a permanent position if you're interested." Lucy felt Wade's eyes on her but didn't immediately look his way. "That's a very generous offer," she said carefully. "I would need some time to consider it, of course." "Of course," Mrs. Fletcher agreed. "No rush for a decision. Just wanted you to know the opportunity exists, should you decide to make Shafter your permanent home." The implication was clear, especially with Wade sitting beside her. Lucy finally glanced his way, finding his expression carefully neutral but his eyes watchful. "Thank you," she said sincerely. "I'm honored by your confidence in me." The conversation moved on to other topics, but Lucy's mind kept returning to the unexpected offer. A permanent teaching position in Shafter would solve one of the major questions about her future: how she would support herself if she chose to remain rather than continuing to Oregon in the spring. After the meal, there were speeches and songs, with several of Lucy's students performing recitations they had practiced for the occasion. Lucy watched proudly as they demonstrated their progress, each successful performance a testament to her effectiveness as a teacher. As the celebration began to wind down in late afternoon, Wade touched her elbow gently. "Walk with me," he murmured. Lucy nodded, retrieving her shawl and bonnet. They said their goodbyes and slipped out of the church into the crisp November air. The sun was already low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the snow-covered street. They walked in silence for a few minutes, their breath forming small clouds in the cold air. Wade led her toward the edge of town, where the prairie stretched white and endless beyond the last buildings. "You've been given a lot to think about today," he finally said. Lucy nodded. "I have. It's a generous offer from the school board." "Would you consider accepting it?" Wade asked, his tone carefully even. Lucy stopped walking and turned to face him. "Wade," she said gently, "any decision I make about staying in Shafter would be influenced more by you than by a teaching position, no matter how appealing." Relief flickered across his face. "I wasn't sure. You found such success with your teaching. I wouldn't want you to feel you had to choose between your work and other considerations." "Why should I have to choose?" Lucy asked, genuinely curious. "Many women both teach and have families." Wade's eyebrows rose slightly. "Is that what you want? Both?" "I don't know exactly what I want yet," Lucy admitted. "But I do know that I love you and I love teaching. I see no reason why those two facts should be in conflict." Wade was quiet for a moment, considering her words. Then he smiled, a full, genuine smile that transformed his usually serious face. "No reason at all," he agreed. "In fact, I have a suggestion if you're willing to hear it." "Of course," Lucy said. Wade gestured toward a small bench someone had placed at the edge of town, overlooking the prairie. They brushed off the snow and sat side by side, Wade taking Lucy's gloved hand in his. "I've been thinking about spring," he began. "About your family in Oregon and your obligations there." Lucy nodded, her heart beating faster. This was the crux of their dilemma, her promise to join her mother and brother in Oregon versus her growing attachment to Shafter and to Wade. "What if," Wade continued carefully, "instead of choosing between Shafter and Oregon, we considered both?" "Both," Lucy repeated, not understanding. Wade nodded. "I could guide you to Oregon in the spring, help you reunite with your family. We could assess the situation there, whether your mother and brother truly need your presence or if they've established themselves independently." "And then," Lucy prompted when he paused. "And then, depending on what we find, we could either remain in Oregon or return to Shafter for the following school year." Wade squeezed her hand gently. "Either way, we'd be together." Lucy considered the suggestion. It was a practical compromise, fulfilling her obligation to her family, while leaving open the possibility of returning to Shafter if circumstances allowed. And most importantly, it kept her and Wade together regardless of location. "It could work," she said slowly. "But it depends on one thing we haven't discussed explicitly." "What's that?" Wade asked. Lucy met his gaze directly. "Whether your vision of our being together includes marriage, Wade Wilson." A smile tugged at the corner of Wade's mouth. "I thought I'd made my intentions clear last night, but perhaps I was too circumspect." He shifted on the bench to face her more directly. "Lucy Sinclair, I love you. I want to spend my life with you as your husband if you'll have me. Whether that life unfolds in Shafter or Oregon or somewhere else entirely doesn't matter to me, as long as we face it together." Joy welled up in Lucy's heart at his words. "That was the right answer, Mr. Wilson," she said softly. "Is that a yes?" Wade asked, hope evident in his blue eyes. "It's a yes," Lucy confirmed. "I will marry you, Wade Wilson, and together we'll figure out where our future leads." Wade's face lit with happiness, and he leaned forward to kiss her a deeper, more certain kiss than their previous ones, full of promise and commitment. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless despite the cold air. "When?" Wade asked, still holding her close. Winter's setting in, but we could be married before Christmas if you wish." Lucy considered this. "After the new year, I think," she said. "I'd like to complete this term of teaching as Miss Sinclair, fulfill my commitment to the school board, and it would give us time to make proper arrangements." Wade nodded, understanding in his expression. "January, then. A new year, a new beginning." "A perfect beginning," Lucy agreed. They sat together on the bench until the winter sunset painted the snow-covered prairie in shades of gold and pink. As darkness began to fall, they walked back toward town, their future no longer uncertain but full of shared purpose and hope. The weeks that followed were among the happiest of Lucy's life. News of her engagement to Wade spread quickly through Shafter, met with general approval, and only a few raised eyebrows at the relatively short duration of their courtship. Most people, having observed their growing relationship and knowing the dramatic circumstances of their meeting, considered it a natural outcome. Lucy continued teaching, her students now aware that she would become Mrs. Wilson after the Christmas break, but would remain their teacher through the school year. Wade began making improvements to his small room above the livery stable, with plans to rent a proper house in town once they were married. As December progressed, Shafter transformed for the Christmas season. Evergreen boughs adorned storefronts, candles glowed in windows, and the church organized a special program featuring the schoolchildren singing carols and performing a nativity play that Lucy directed. Wade was a constant presence in her life, joining her for meals, escorting her to church and community events, helping with small repairs around the cottage. They talked for hours, planning their future, sharing hopes and dreams, occasionally disagreeing but always finding common ground. Lucy wrote to her mother with news of her engagement, explaining her plans to travel to Oregon in the spring with Wade to visit before potentially returning to Shafter for the next school year. Eleanor Sinclair's reply was cautiously supportive, expressing a desire to meet her future son-in-law and understand her daughter's new life better before offering full approval. "She's reserving judgment until she meets you," Lucy told Wade as they sat by the fire one evening in mid-December, sharing the contents of her mother's letter. "But that's progress. A month ago, she would have been scandalized by my marrying someone she hadn't personally vetted." Wade smiled wryly. "I'm not sure I'll pass her vetting, coming from such different circumstances than your Philadelphia circles." "You'll win her over," Lucy assured him. "Just as you did me. Mother values integrity above all else, and you have that in abundance." Christmas arrived with a week of school holidays and a fresh blanket of snow that transformed Shafter into a winter wonderland. The community gathered for special church services, a town feast similar to Thanksgiving but with seasonal additions, and an evening of caroling that culminated in hot cider and cookies at the schoolhouse. On Christmas Eve, Wade presented Lucy with her engagement ring, a simple gold band set with a small diamond that had belonged to his mother. "It's not elaborate," he said as he slipped it onto her finger, "but it's given with all my heart." "It's perfect," Lucy assured him, admiring how it caught the light. "I'll treasure it always." She gave him a gift in return, a fine pocket watch she had ordered from a catalog and had engraved with the words "We'll go together" and the date they had met on the prairie. "To remind you of your promise," she explained as he examined it with evident emotion. "The promise that changed both our lives." "Best promise I ever made," Wade said, pulling her close for a kiss that left no doubt of his feelings. New Year's Day 1868 dawned clear and bitterly cold in Shafter. The town was quiet after the previous night's celebrations, most residents staying indoors beside their fires rather than venturing out into the sub-zero temperatures. Lucy spent the morning writing in her journal, reflecting on the extraordinary changes the past year had brought to her life and anticipating those to come. She had arranged with Reverend Thomas to hold their wedding ceremony on January 10th, a Saturday when the entire community could attend if they wished. Preparations were well underway. Her wedding dress, a simple but elegant creation in pale blue wool, hung in her wardrobe. The church ladies were planning refreshments for the reception, and Mrs. Thornton had offered the hotel dining room for a special wedding supper afterward. Wade arrived at the cottage around noon, bundled against the cold but smiling warmly as he stomped snow from his boots at her door. "Happy New Year, almost Mrs. Wilson," he greeted her, pulling off his gloves to take her hands in his. "Happy New Year, almost husband," Lucy replied, rising on tiptoes to kiss his cold cheek. "Come in and warm yourself. I've made stew." They ate together at Lucy's small table, discussing plans for the coming week and the wedding. Wade had news he had secured a small house on the edge of town for them to rent, starting immediately. "It's nothing grand," he cautioned. "2 bedrooms, a kitchen, a small parlor, but it's sound and warm with a decent stable for Chance and room for a garden come spring." "It sounds wonderful," Lucy said sincerely. "When can I see it?" "Today, if you're willing to brave the cold." The owner left the key with Sheriff Mills. After lunch, they bundled up against the winter chill and walked to the sheriff's office to collect the key, then continued to the outskirts of town opposite the schoolhouse. The house Wade had rented was indeed small but well built, set back from the road with several pine trees providing shelter from the wind. Inside, it was simply furnished but clean, with a pot-bellied stove in the parlor, a cookstove in the kitchen, and basic furniture throughout. The main bedroom had a large window facing east, allowing morning light to flood the space. "It needs a woman's touch," Wade acknowledged as they toured the rooms. "But it's a place we can call our own, at least until we decide whether to settle permanently in Shafter or move elsewhere." Lucy walked through the small house, imagining their life together, their quiet evenings by the fire, meals shared at the kitchen table, perhaps someday children playing in the second bedroom. It was a far cry from the elegant Philadelphia home she had grown up in, but it felt right in a way she couldn't fully articulate. "I love it," she said simply, turning to Wade with a smile. "It's perfect for us." Relief and pleasure crossed his face. "I was hoping you'd think so." "We can move your things from the cottage after the wedding. Make it our home together." They spent the rest of the afternoon at the house, planning where Lucy's few possessions would go, discussing items they would need to purchase, and generally beginning to merge their separate lives into a shared one. By the time they left to return to the cottage for supper, the house had already begun to feel like theirs in Lucy's mind. The days leading up to the wedding passed in a flurry of final preparations and teaching duties, as school resumed for the winter term. Lucy's students were excited about her upcoming marriage, the younger ones peppering her with questions about her dress and whether they could call her Mrs. Wilson instead of Miss Sinclair after the ceremony. On the morning of January 10th, Lucy awoke to perfect winter weather, brilliant sunshine sparkling on fresh snow, the temperature cold but not bitter, the sky a clear, endless blue that reminded her of Wade's eyes. She took it as a good omen for their life together. Mrs. Pearson and Mrs. Fletcher arrived at the cottage mid-morning to help her prepare, bringing flowers forced in the doctor's greenhouse and a beautiful lace shawl that the women of Shafter had collectively purchased as a wedding gift. "Something borrowed and something new in one," Mrs. Pearson explained as she draped it around Lucy's shoulders. "We all contributed a bit, wanted you to know how much you've come to mean to this town." Lucy was deeply touched by the gesture. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. I never expected to find such friendship here." "Shafter takes care of its own," Mrs. Fletcher replied, echoing what Wade had told Lucy months earlier. "And you became one of us the moment you decided to stay." By 1 o'clock, Lucy was ready, dressed in her blue wool gown with the lace shawl around her shoulders, her hair arranged in soft curls beneath a simple veil, a small bouquet of winter blooms in her hands. Scout had been fed and settled with extra treats, promised that he would move to the new house after the celebration. Sheriff Mills arrived with a wagon to transport the bride to the church, helping her aboard with gallant care not to damage her finery. As they drove through town, Lucy saw people already making their way toward the church, families dressed in their Sunday best despite the snow-covered streets. At the church steps, Sheriff Mills handed her down from the wagon with a fatherly smile. "Wilson's a lucky man, Miss Sinclair. And Shafter's lucky to be keeping you." "Thank you, Sheriff," Lucy replied warmly, "for everything you've done for us." Inside, the church was transformed, evergreen boughs and white ribbons decorating the pews, candles glowing at the altar. The space filled with familiar faces turned expectantly toward the door as Lucy entered. And there at the altar stood Wade, more handsome than she had ever seen him in a new dark suit, his usually unruly hair neatly combed, his expression a mixture of awe and joy as he watched her walk toward him on Sheriff Mills' arm. The ceremony itself was both traditional and personal. Reverend Thomas spoke of love's endurance through trials, of partnerships forged in adversity, of two people choosing to face life's challenges together rather than separately. Wade and Lucy exchanged simple vows and rings, their voices steady despite the emotion evident in both their faces. "By the authority vested in me," Reverend Thomas concluded, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." He smiled warmly at the couple before him. "Mr. Wilson, you may kiss your bride." Wade needed no further invitation. He drew Lucy gently into his arms and kissed her with tender reverence, sealing their commitment before the community that had become their extended family. The reception that followed was jubilant, a celebration not just of Wade and Lucy's marriage, but of the community's triumph over winter's isolation through shared joy. There was music from a hastily assembled band, dancing in the cleared church hall, food and drink in abundance, and congratulations from what seemed like every resident of Shafter. As evening approached, Wade found Lucy in conversation with several of her students and their parents. "Ready to escape?" he murmured in her ear. Lucy nodded, suddenly eager to begin their life together away from the well-meaning but exhausting attention of the townspeople. They made their goodbyes, accepting final congratulations and dodging the traditional shower of rice as they exited the church. Outside, to Lucy's surprise, waited a sleigh drawn by 2 horses, decorated with ribbons and bells. "Your chariot, Mrs. Wilson," Wade said with a smile, helping her aboard and covering them both with thick furs against the evening chill. "Whose sleigh?" Lucy asked as they glided away from the church, the bells creating a merry accompaniment to the horses' movements. "James Garrett's," Wade replied. "A wedding gift of sorts, the loan of his best sleigh and team to take us home in style." He glanced at her, uncertainty flickering in his eyes. "I thought you might enjoy it more than walking through the snow in your wedding clothes." "It's perfect," Lucy assured him, snuggling closer beneath the furs. "A magical end to a wonderful day." They rode through town, the sleigh's runners hissing over the snow, people waving from doorways and windows as they passed. Lucy leaned against Wade's shoulder, content in a way she had never experienced before, a sense of rightness, of being exactly where she was meant to be with exactly the right person beside her. When they reached their small house, Wade drew the sleigh to a halt and secured the horses. Then, to Lucy's surprise and delight, he lifted her from the seat and carried her across the threshold, setting her gently on her feet in the parlor where a fire already blazed in the stove, warming the space against the January chill. "Welcome home, Mrs. Wilson," he said softly. Lucy looked around the small parlor, now containing some of her belongings alongside Wade's, transformed from a simple rental into the beginning of their shared life. "Our home," she corrected gently. "Wherever we go from here, wherever life leads us, we'll always have this our first home together." Wade drew her into his arms, his expression more open and vulnerable than she had ever seen it. "I never expected to find you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Never thought I'd find someone who could understand both who I was and who I'm trying to become." Lucy reached up to touch his face, tracing the strong line of his jaw with gentle fingers. "Nor I you," she replied softly. "But here we are, against all odds. Perhaps it was always meant to be this way, me left behind, you turning back, us finding our way together." "Together," Wade agreed, bending to kiss her with newfound freedom, no longer constrained by propriety or the watchful eyes of others, but simply a husband expressing love for his wife in the privacy of their own home. As the kiss deepened, Lucy felt the last barriers between them dissolving. They had faced hardship together, built trust through shared challenges, and now stood on the threshold of a deeper intimacy, the final blending of their separate lives into one shared journey. Later, as they lay together in the quiet darkness of their bedroom, Wade's arm a comforting weight across her waist, Lucy reflected on the extraordinary path that had brought them to this moment. From abandonment on the prairie to finding home and love in a frontier town, her life had taken turns she could never have anticipated when she left Philadelphia less than a year earlier. "What are you thinking?" Wade murmured, his breath warm against her hair. "About journeys," Lucy replied softly. "How the ones that seem most disastrous can lead to unexpected joys." Wade's arm tightened around her. "I'm sorry for what you suffered, but I can't be sorry for how it brought us together." "Nor can I," Lucy admitted. "I wouldn't change a moment of it, not even the fear and abandonment, if it meant losing you." They fell silent, the only sounds the occasional crackle from the stove in the parlor and the distant howl of a coyote on the prairie beyond town. Lucy felt herself drifting toward sleep, perfectly content in Wade's embrace. "Lucy," Wade's voice came softly through the darkness. Thank you for choosing this life, for choosing me." Lucy turned in his arms to face him, though she could barely make out his features in the dim light. "I think perhaps life chose for both of us," she said, "but I'm very glad it did." Wade kissed her forehead gently. "Sleep now, wife. Tomorrow is the first day of our life together." "The first of many," Lucy murmured, nestling closer as sleep claimed her. Outside, snow began to fall gently, blanketing Shafter in pristine white. The winter would be long, but spring would eventually come, bringing new growth and possibilities. Lucy and Wade would face whatever the future held together, their bond forged in adversity, but sustained by love and mutual respect. For a woman left behind when the wagon train moved on, and the cowboy who had stayed, saying, "We'll go together," life had come full circle. They had indeed gone together, not just along a physical trail, but on a journey of the heart that had led them to each other, and to a happiness neither had expected to find. And in that discovery, both had found not just a partner, but a home, not a place, but a person with whom to share all of life's journeys, whatever paths they might choose to follow in the years to come.